Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Radcast of the Social Club at the End of This World. We're going to start off with some brief personal updates, and then we'll get into the agenda for today. And who would like to give a personal update? Just raise your hand so I can see you. If you'd like to give a personal update. I see Miles. Anyone else? I have a personal update. All right. So Miles followed by Jamin on personal updates. Take it away, Miles.
Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the newcomers. My name's Miles Flegg and calling in from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I always like to acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 7 territory. And this is the traditional land of the Bloods, Piegans, Siksika, Stoney, and Tsuut'ina nations. And my update is on Tuesday, I had the honor and privilege of meeting Dorothy Firstrider, who is one of the authors of this book titled The True Spirit and the Original Intent of Treaty 7. I was also blessed to meet another lady, Annabelle Crop-Eared Wolf, who wrote a master's thesis related to peacemaking and peacekeeping of the Kainai, also known as the Blood Nation. And I'm really interested in pursuing what she taught me, and I'm going to present that in the future. So anyway, that's my update. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Miles. All right, I'll give my personal update. I was gone to California, where I was with Uncle Frank and other relatives. We had a memorial last week for our Aunt Maravillas, and then Uncle Frank and I went down to Southern California, to Ojai specifically, near Santa Barbara, where we participated in a 3-day retreat, kind of a spiritual retreat, that was led by essentially a Kogi master. It's not someone who was born a Kogi, but was trained over decades and has become a Kogi of the Kogi tribe, which is one of the First Nations tribes of South America, and one that has remained isolated from, shall we say, the modern world, modern cultures, modern geopolitical whatever, excuse me, and have maintained their worldview. And so it was a really profound experience to be 3 days with this Kogi master. Mama is the title. And Miles, thank you for acknowledging the lands where you are. I would also similarly like to acknowledge that here in Western Washington, I'm broadcasting from the lands of the Coast Salish tribes here surrounding the Puget Sound of Western Washington. And so aside from that update of our travels to Southern California, I have been, well, there's a lot more to say about that, because in the process of this 3-day retreat, I started to, reconnect with my own spirit and I'm on an intense quest to really connect with my own spirit and discover my sacred contract, my spiritual journey here, my mission here on earth, which has been a continual process of discovery for me, but one I'm taking very seriously. And so spirit, as distinct from mind, I've often been very mental, very much in my head, and of course, as distinct from body. And then in parallel with all that, we've been discussing a number of topics, I and colleagues and many of you, we've been in an ongoing conversation about how do we create both the best platform for bringing the world together, for co-creating solutions to our most daunting problems, notably abrupt climate change and the destruction of the biosphere. And in addition to building this platform for bringing people together, what is our strategy or our plan for bringing people together and co-creating both a new culture and new practices of co-creating solutions. So that's basically it for my update, and we'll get more into the aforementioned topics as we get into the main part of the program. Meanwhile, Vishal has asked, what is the YouTube link for people to watch? Adam, would you be good enough to share the link so that people can, Vishal and others can share that link for just viewing this this broadcast online live as opposed to participating. I've emailed out the link to join, and everyone's welcome to join, of course, but some people prefer to just watch. Great. Thank you, Adam. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Does anyone else want to give a personal update? Now would be the time to jump in if you'd like to. All right. Very good. So now let's shift to discussing the agenda, and I'd like to invite everyone to comment on what you'd like included in today's agenda. We often go long, 2-3 hours. And I think the longest we've gone is like 5 or 5.5 hours at a stretch, and that's partly by design, in the sense that we certainly don't encourage long-windedness, and I try not to be long-winded myself. But having said that, sometimes it takes a few minutes to develop what you want to say. This is not Fox News where you've got some jerk in a necktie interrupting you every 20 seconds, demanding that you get to the point. If it takes 5 minutes, to say what you need to say, take 5 minutes. What I'll often do is keep track of the time. Miles just put himself in the queue, so thank you, Miles. I'll keep track of the time, and if you're at the 5-minute mark, I'll gently hold up 5 fingers. Let me tell you what that does not mean, and then I'll tell you what it does mean. What that does not mean is stop talking. It doesn't mean that. Okay. What it does mean is, you're at 5 minutes, so just be conscious of that. And then if you reach 6, I'll hold up 6 fingers. If you reach 7, I'll hold up 7 fingers. And, but we have kind of a soft ceiling of 5 minutes, but it's very soft. If you need to go longer, if you're on a roll, even at 7 minutes in, keep rolling, right? But, also, so it's kind of a balance between, ideally, I think we'd maybe talk for a couple of minutes each and then keep it moving, especially if there's other people in the queue. So anyway, if anyone has any questions about that, just jump in. But we're talking agenda at this point, and before I pass the baton to Miles, I would, and especially since we have some first-time guests on the program, I'd like to propose that we talk a little bit more about the platform for collective intelligence that we've been developing, and even some of the strategies for getting the world to come and participate in collective intelligence and the co-creation of solutions. I might even share some of my background as part of the agenda, and totally open to suggestions for other agenda items. And with that, I'll pass it over to Miles. Take it away, Miles.
Thank you, Jamin. Well, for the agenda, I would really like to put on the agenda this concept of consciousness raising, because it really relates to what Dr. Rao is talking about on his channel in that we want to move to this ahimsa, I believe is the word he uses, from being Homo sapien, ones who think, to Homo ahimsa. And the definition of ahimsa is essentially nonviolence. So this is where we, if we're going to solve this issue of our ecological emergency, we have to, as we've said in the past, we've all agreed, look at it as a mental health emergency or a psychological emergency of the soul. And coincidence that you met with a First Nations person from South America, and I met with First Nations here on the Blackfoot Confederacy here in Alberta. And the First Nations people or Indigenous people have a unique perspective on how to look at Mother Earth that I never had, and probably still need to learn more. So this and Adam, this connects to his approach to looking at the world through new lenses and a paradigm that doesn't emphasize money. So I'll just summarize to read from the back of the book that I said Elder Dorothy Firstrider collaborated on. It says here that this book is about an interview of and testimony of over 80 elders from First Nations here on the Blackfoot Confederacy, which I might add extends right down to Wyoming, right through Montana. So we have even though I'm in Canada, we're linked in a sense because the border is an artificial creation imposed upon the Blackfoot people. And so there's something I think that we need to consider, because the treaty, as the elders understood it, was a peace treaty, not a surrender of land. They agreed to share the land with the white newcomers in exchange for resources to allow the development of new economies, educational opportunities, medical assistance, and annuity payments. And in Canada here, we've really abused that treaty relationship and essentially coerced or manipulated and in fact, the issue of murdered, missing, and Indigenous women and girls is considered part of an ongoing genocide. Those are not my words. Those are words that have actually been used by the Prime Minister of Canada in acknowledging that essentially as long as First Nations aren't properly respected. So anyhow, just a long-winded way of saying to you, Jamin, I'd like to hear more about your meeting with the shaman and how you would see this all being woven into this collective intelligence. Because if we don't put in a spiritual value system into the collective intelligence, I think we're just going to continue on the road of destruction. Thank you.
Very good, Miles. That's a really good place to start. Is kind of what is our goal with everything we're doing here, and so I'll just jump in now, and we can add to the agenda or just let it evolve organically. And I really encourage people to put yourself in the queue. Wave at me if you don't know how to type your name in, or just type your name in. But I'll just start with the goal of, I'm just going to call it transformation generally. And it's kind of, we've all heard about multi-core processors, which are on most modern computers. Well, I see this as kind of a multi-core problem. There's not a single core. Like the core is, we need to transform culture, or the core is we need to get rid of money, or the core is, we need unity. It's a multi-core problem of transformation. And one of the cores, perhaps the core, is a spiritual transformation, getting in touch with our own spirit as well as the spirit of the creator and creation. So that's one. I'm just going to call it spiritual transformation, just 2 words and leave it at that. We also need a radical transformation in our culture, in how we're walking the earth. Right now we have a culture of hoarding and of mastery and of dominion, as reflected in how we produce and distribute food, how we live, how we treat land and property. I own this property, right? This is my land. I get to farm it however I want, et cetera, et cetera. That's all part of a culture. And so we need radical cultural transformation. We need to transform that. Closely associated with that, which I mentioned, is our set of living arrangements, how we live, how we walk the earth. And we need a radical transformation in our entire set of living arrangements, which in turn will drive a radical transformation in our entire economy. Both the mode of production of our economy, which is currently the vast majority of the world is in a mode of production of hoarding, of accumulation. The way to score points in this world is to hoard more and more and more wealth, more and more land, more and more livestock, more and more money, gold, Bitcoin, whatever, dollars. And to use that hoarded wealth to personal advantage. And so I believe we need a radical transformation in that. We also need some emergency transformations in the heat balance here on Mother Earth, on planet Earth, on spaceship Earth. We're overheating. And if we don't get a handle on that, you can kiss goodbye everything else, because, as we all know, the ice is rapidly melting. Interiors of continents are suffering from heat, overheating like northern India, flooding like the American Midwest, sea level rise and coastal deterioration. I mean, just to name a few. You've got oceans overheating, acidification, mass dying of sea life, mass extinction of life generally. I mean, it's beyond a red alert for the planet. So we need a transformation in our heat balance, among other radical transformations for making life sustainable on Earth. But as far as so let me just run through just kind of a mini narrative, starting with the heat balance one, right? So I believe that we urgently need to invent and develop and deploy very, very rapidly methods of geoshading, reflecting a portion of the sunlight that's hitting our planet back into space. And a perfect example of that is the Arctic ice, right? It acts as a giant mirror. Massive amounts of sunlight hit the North Pole, especially during the summer months, like right now, and that mirror reflects that sunlight back into space rather than being absorbed by dark ocean seawater and heating up the planet. Now, if we lose the Arctic ice, which we're at risk of doing, we could have an ice-free Arctic as soon as next summer. If we lose that mirror, that sunlight would then land on dark blue ocean seawater, which would absorb the vast majority of it rather than reflecting the majority of it away, like my white shirt does with this even whiter Arctic ice. So I believe we urgently need to refreeze the Arctic, preserve that mirror, and even bolster it with other mirrors. And there's different kinds of mirrors that we can develop. Land-based mirrors, cloud-based mirrors, space-based mirrors, like at the L1 Lagrange point between the Earth and the Sun, which my uncle, who's a physicist, and I were discussing in the last few days. But we need to lower the heat load on Mother Earth. Absolutely crucial. We need a dimmer switch for the sun, basically. So remember, I said I was going to discuss a little mini narrative. So I'm going to start with that, the heat balance, and then go through politics, economics, culture, etc. In order to achieve geoshading to cool the planet, we also need, in other words, in addition to coming up with the engineering solutions, We need the ways to fund and finance and get international support for that. That all requires a political transformation, right? Donald Trump style politics as usual is not going to carry the day if we're just, pulling the wool over our own eyes as to the magnitude and urgency of the problem. So from heat balance transformation, basically geoengineering, geoshading solutions, we need political transformation to support that. In order to get political transformation to happen, we need cultural transformation, right? And that can come in different forms. We need transformation in what we're talking about. What are the topics of the day? We need transformation in the media, including social media, education, all the way to, what we're talking about at the water cooler at work or at the university, right? What are we talking about? What are we concerned about? What are the conversations that really, to a large degree, define our culture? So we need cultural transformation. In order to support cultural transformation, we then also need a transformation in our very fundamental story of humanity. Who are we? Why are we here? How did we get here? And where are we going? So I put all that under the bucket of story, of our fundamental story of humanity. And then also in support of saving life on Earth and healing Mother Earth, we need transformations in our economy. What is the basis of our economy? Welcome, Melissa, my queen, Melissa. Welcome, sweetie. We're in full swing here. I'm just kind of giving kind of a broad overview. We've got Vishal here. Vishal is joining us.
Hey, Vishal.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
We've also got Nandini joining us for the first time. Arvin is back. Uncle Frank's there. Fred, Miles, Adam.
Beautiful.
So we got a whole good group here today. Here's Melissa. All right, let me adjust the camera here.
That's fine.
Okay. So we're just talking about all the different transformations that are necessary in order to save life on Earth, and how they all support each other. We need a radical transformation in our entire set of living arrangements, from each of us trying to live in as big of a McMansion as we can, with as many cars and boats and private airplanes as we can accumulate, to a radically different modality of life, which I often use the metaphor of an ant colony. By the way, I'm getting a bit long-winded here, and I'm not too comfortable with that. So I'd love to invite people to jump in the queue so I can then call on you. So just jump in when you feel like it. Just put your name in there in the queue. I don't think we've got anyone in the queue at the moment, but let me verify. Let's see. Miles, that was a few minutes ago. Okay. So yeah, no one's in the queue. Jump in. And in the meantime, I'll just keep riffing. But so transformation in our entire set of living arrangements, which again will drive a transformation in the economy. The global economy exists to service that which people are demanding, right? That which is in demand. So if we transform our entire set of living arrangements, it will transform demand for building materials, what types and quantities, demand for transportation, demand for clothing, what types of clothing, demand for food. This is a huge one. And we owe a huge gratitude to our friend Dr. Silas Rao for promoting veganism, which Melissa and I are in the process of embracing, and which has been a difficult journey and kind of a bumpy one, but we're nonetheless on the path. And so this might be a good moment, since no one's in the queue. I'll just get ready to screen share a little bit here. Yes, sweetheart?
I'd love to add something.
Okay, here. Why don't you just jump in? Jump in, sweetie.
So I just had this wonderful conversation with another artist, good friend of mine, who's also an activist. She's working a lot on social change and social equality issues right now. And one of the things we were just talking about is working together to create a resilient community, working together to release things we no longer need anymore. So that really addresses us as a consuming materialistic society. Working together to become fully present in order to affect change. Because there's a lot of people now, because of everything falling apart and all the stresses and problems with the economy and politics, etc., the environment, people are taking drugs and alcohol and numbing themselves out. But we need to be fully present and engaged in order to affect change, and also to look back into the past to find ways that are going to help us move forward into the future, and how to be restorative. So I just wanted to put that out there because I thought that was a very helpful way of kind of structuring a way to look for positive roadways or ways forward in our actions together as co-creators or co-creatives.
Beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart. All right. More comments, everyone, as, on the topic of, what is our goal and how are we going to get there?
I'll just jump in with a quick comment.
Yeah.
In fact, I just heard this interview with a Jungian analyst. So there's psychologists who specialize in the work of Carl Jung. And I believe this gentleman, his last name is Todd, and he's on a podcast of Laura London's called Speaking of Jung. Anyway, he said that the unconscious is ever present and it's always knocking on the door. And if we don't open the door to the unconscious, it's going to bust it down. And that's where we're at. I think the unconscious, and this word unconscious, just think of it as God or creator, if you want. And it's the more we talk, though, in trying to be conscious, which means, as I defined, having spent time with Skip Conover on his channel, conscious means science, which is thinking, with con, which is with. So it's thinking in withness. So the more we can talk and generate ideas, share spiritual perspectives as well, we are opening the door slowly to the unconscious. And so our job here on earth, you could say, some people believe that our meaning and purpose is to go to higher levels of consciousness, of thinking with withness. But anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. If we don't open the door soon, the unconscious is going to actually just kick it down and can be quite violent in a sense. Like it's a power that can be certainly put to positive use, but if it's ignored, it can be to our demise. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Miles. All right. Adam just put himself in the queue. Take it away, Adam.
All right. Yeah, I found out some interesting things from Graham Hancock published a book lately, and can't even remember the name of it, but and Brian Forrester also talks about it, and it's about a comet that hit Greenland about 12,000 years ago, and it wiped out the fauna that people lived with back in those days. And I just wanted to go on screen share for a second and show you this fauna that I've, okay, here we go. Now, it should be right here. Do you see that?
Yeah, we see it, Adam. We see it.
Well, just look at that. I mean, these are those creatures. And look at the size of them. I mean, it's just amazing. And this is prior to the comet that happened 12,000 years ago. And so it's really incredible, I think. I mean, look at how they had to live with these creatures. And I just find that really profound, because we don't even. I mean, I didn't think about that very much when I study these ancient people. I'm going to talk about the story of humanity, and I'll just go ahead and screen share something else here. I know I've shared this before, but I think this is the story of humanity right here, because anthropology studies today tell us we originated on Earth about 315,000 years ago. And basically, the whole time that we're living on Earth as hunters and gatherers, there's about 10 million or less people on Earth. And I really don't think that during this time that we were warring and tearing each other apart, invading each other, I think that their populations were so small at that time. They lived in groups of like 40 to a maximum of 150. And I think that they were very careful, probably, to watch their behaviors, the seven deadly sins, so they didn't, beat each other up and fight and quarrel within their own clan, because they really wanted to survive, and their clans depended on each other. So if there's fighting within the clan, that would be a cause for alarm. And anyway, so then about this is a point about 7,000 years ago right here. And at that point, we changed from hunters and gatherers, and we became planters and herders. Some people did. And I think that was a huge change when that happened. Because especially when we start herding, well, planting caused our populations to go up, and then the raising of the populations going up created a competitive world, and when we started herding, our relationship with life changed. So there's a lot of changes that happen right in here. Instead of like before, when we lived in this area, we lived in harmony. We loved the animals. We lived in the relationship where we adapt to nature. And that's basically the rule of all life on Earth. All life adapts to nature. But when we started planting and herding, that's kind of like saying, I'm going to take over control of nature. And
Adam, you seem to be breaking up a bit. Is anyone else having trouble hearing Adam? Yeah. Okay, Adam, you're breaking up. Maybe get off screen share and yeah, you're not muted, but we can't hear you. So anyway, hopefully that'll get resolved soon. But your points are really good. I'm just going to make a super quick comment. By the way, it's okay to make super quick comments, even if you're not in the queue. Just jump in and comment. And Fred, you're on mute. It looks like you're trying to say something. But the super quick comment I want to make is that we, that increase in population is almost a thousandfold increase in population. in a period of 10,000 years. Half of that increase in population happened during my lifetime in the last 50 years. And we're now at a clip where we're adding 1 billion people every 13 years. So that's the quick comment I wanted to make. Miles is next in the queue, followed by Melissa. Welcome to Dan and Jason, who just joined. And I'll ask everyone to go on mute when you're not talking. Fred has a comment he wants to make, so I'm going to add you to the queue, Fred. So Miles, followed by Melissa, followed by Fred. Take it away, Miles.
Related to what Adam was talking about, as to how we lived more in harmony with the Mother Earth. In fact, the Blackfoot people, and their name is Niitsitapi, which I believe means the real people. And their name for God, I don't have the indigenous word in their language, but it means the giver of life. So the First Nations people, they're human beings as well. So they're not perfect people, but they did live the way that Adam was describing people lived not too long ago. We all lived that way. And for whatever reason, parts of the planet went a little bonkers. And there's all sorts of theories for why these things have happened, and technology has exploded. But the consequences are, we're in a planetary emergency right now. One of the things I'd like to put to everybody is that I'm in Canada, and about 2 days ago, Canada actually declared a climate emergency, a national climate emergency. It's really peculiar, though, because then 2 days later, they approve what is called the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And they have this convoluted thinking that we're going to make money selling this tar sands oil on the world market. And that money is going to be used to create and deploy green technology. It's just like bizarre thinking. Anyway, just throw that into the mix as an update as well. And I'm not sure where it's going, but it's certainly creating a lot of controversy here. And I don't know, it just seems, looks really bizarre, hypocritical. And I'd also just add another thing is it's also a bit of a manipulation too, in that this pipeline, there's actually a move afoot to allow First Nations to own 51% of it. So anyhow, I don't know how you explain all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. All right, good stuff, really good stuff. So Melissa is up next, followed by Fred, followed by Dan. Take it away, Melissa.
I'm going to be a little long-winded. I hope you guys don't mind. But Miles, following on what you said, I found this in the newspaper yesterday, which is exactly what you're talking about. It says Trans Mountain Pipeline project is a go. Canadian Prime Minister on Tuesday approved the project. And it says that he declares himself an environmentalist. So I don't quite get this one. I do believe the reason that they've offered such a large chunk of interest in the pipeline to First Nations is to enslave them. This happens a lot where white men offer money, which is not a healthy relationship. Natives don't have a healthy relationship with that. And I don't mean any offense, but many have fought against, casinos being built, etc. They have their own ways, and they don't want to destroy Mother Earth. So that'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. I just wanted to come back to what you were saying, Adam. I have a slightly different view, in that consciousness evolves continuously. And if you look at every epoch of of humanity. So Byzantine Empire, Roman Empire, ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Atlantis, Mayan. The consciousness of the culture and the people at that time was very specific. And we are not in the same consciousness as they were in ancient Egypt. And if you look at the art and architecture and rituals of these different civilizations, you will see, one can glean where they kind of were. Like the Egyptians weren't fully awake. They were still in a sort of semi-dream state. So people didn't experience this planetary realm in the same way in different civilizations. So our experience now, which is very much logos, logic, science, technology, it is, I believe, very different from previous civilizations. And our response to the world and to the universe is very particular because of our conscious state of consciousness. And I just wanted to read something from this really great book. It's called Navajo and Tibetan Sacred Wisdom, The Circle of the Spirits. And this is Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And he says, when human beings lose their connection to nature, to heaven and earth, then they do not know how to nurture their environment or how to rule their world. Healing our society goes hand in hand with healing our personal elemental connection with the phenomenal world. I think we probably all agree with that. And then I wanted to read something else, which is interestingly by a Tibetan, but this prophecy comes from many indigenous peoples. I know the Hopi in their prophecy say the same thing. It's with a little bit different wording, but I just wanted to read this as a reminder that there is a bigger picture happening here that some of us sense, some of us see, many do not see. For 1,000 years, religion will be taught, but then will come the end of the world. Fire will be followed by wind, destroying all we have built. Then will come water to cover everything we know. Only a few will survive in caves and in the tops of trees. The gods will come from Ganden paradise and take these people back with them. They will be taught so that religion will not die. And when once again the winds blow the milk ocean, and once again the world is formed, these same enlightened ones, saved from the world before, will be the stars in the sky. So I'll sign off with that one. Food for thought.
Beautiful. Thank you, sweetie. Wow. Really great conversation. This is the social club at the end of this world. These last several comments are a great example of that. Okay, next up is Fred, followed by Dan, followed by Jamin. Take it away, Fred.
Conversation sort of overwhelming. All of the talk of transformation, and I haven't heard the word time once again. We seem to ignore that. And, the world seems so fragmented and self-interested in tribal life, let's say. I mean, President Trump seems to be trying to get us into a war with Iran right now. There are lots of countries who are embattled. Is there space for the world to come together and understand as somebody keeps saying, planetary emergency? It's an emergency. It's not, that means the house is on fire and we've all got to get together. How do we do that? How do we bring that concept to people so they go, Jesus, we better stop torpedoing oil tankers or whatever. We don't have time for this. And there seems to be so much self-interest everywhere. I just don't know how or what the key will be that will make everybody go, Jesus, this is an emergency. We have to put down our personal or petty concerns right now. Otherwise, we're going to burn up the earth, whatever. So that's my frustration with our discussion, which is beautiful. I mean, it's been a very, the spiritual element. We've been trying to reach some sort of spiritual. God, how do I say it? There's sort of a messianic quality to our discussion today. Like how are we going to get all the religions of the world to put down their notions of what's right and how to get there and get on board together? I mean, if we need a spiritual transformation, all of these things, I'm sorry, seem enormously complex in the face of the clock ticking. And yeah, so I'm sorry. That's I have days like this when I look at this, the problem, the situation, I just go, my God, people can't seem to agree on anything. How are we going to get them to agree on this enormous thing? Planetary emergency. Okay, that's, yeah, I'm being the nattering nabob of negativism again, so I'm sorry. I feel like we have to come up with some key that everybody can hang on to and move forward with. Anyway, I'm done.
Awesome. First of all, Fred, you don't have to apologize. Great comment. Melissa's got a quick comment. I've got a quick comment. And then next in the queue is Dan, followed by Jamin, followed by Adam. So go ahead, sweetie.
Yeah, Fred, I love what you're saying. And I think we need to find commonality, common ground to bring all these disparate groups together with clear agreements about how we move forward. And I just wanted to, I don't know if I got the name right, but it's a UK climate scientist, Jen Badel. Any of you heard of him? There's a podcast called A Beautiful Future, and he addresses how to re-envision the future and work together in a time of climate collapse. So I think, that might be an interesting one for us all to listen to. And Fred, that might inspire ideas, Thanks.
Absolutely. And my quick comment is, again, no need to apologize. You don't worry about being negative. We're all groping here for that. And I like the way you put it at the very end, for the key. What is the key?
Mm-hmm.
We're groping for the key, like in Lord of the Rings. And so here to shine some light on the keyhole is Dan. Up next is Dan, followed by Jamin, followed by Adam. Take it away, Dan.
Yeah, so let me pick up a little bit where Fred left off, because that is a critical point. The point of the denial in some quarters and the resistance to assimilating the time factor risk. It's and I see it and I feel it more and more. Where so Guy McPherson probably is saying right now, we've got till 2026 and then it's over. Extinction, human extinction. So that's a possibility, if you actually look at all of the evidence he strung together, and you can see it on his website today. It's there, and the references of the evidence he's using is there. Pearson. The Social Club was put together in the beginning on the basis that, Guy McPherson has got a pretty compelling, rational, evidence-backed theory about where we're headed. And now's the time to let's see if there's anything we can do on an emergency basis before the planet implodes. And I brought up a couple of things. I want to bring them up here again. So the United States military has been operating under the assumption that abrupt climate change, not Guy McPherson 2026, it's over, but all of the disasters are coming very, very quickly. They have been carrying out rehearsals to block people from.
Shit.
No, it's not you, Fred. Dan froze up. Fred, you may want to mute. Please continue, Dan. I think you're back.
Okay, so again, the United States military, which is a very realistic organization when it comes to what they call security threats, and they've been on this since the mid-1990s, and they have many, many preparations in place, essentially to have completely militarized borders. Kind of like what you used to have in Europe. The Eastern Bloc and the Berlin Wall and all of that. What the United States military perceives is there's going to be a time when, let's say, and it may come very quickly, of course, that Central America can no longer provide their people with food adequate for survival. And the United States and other places can no longer send them food to rescue them because of their own shortages, just like our grain crop this year here in the United States may suffer a devastating loss. Well, under those conditions, what are we going to do? Are we just going to let everybody, from the military's point of view, just come on in? Or are we going to militarize the borders and, tell people, sorry, you're on your own here? This is the mindset that's out there. And as I mentioned, India already has their militarized border with Bangladesh. They have a huge number of people stationed there with orders to kill anybody who comes across the barbed wire barriers they've set up. They anticipate, who knows when, maybe this year, Bangladesh gets kind of flooded out and wiped out in terms of whatever food production they have. And then they want to come up into India. We already know that up in northern India right now, the temperatures and the drought up there are just killing people, literally. It's the kind of thing that, doomer Guy McPherson used to talk about, some years ago. So things are happening. There is not denial in terms of the threat on the part of the United States military and the security apparatus. But every scientist that's involved in the military or the intelligence communities, they're sworn to secrecy. They cannot say anything, and they don't say anything. So, but we have to be able to assimilate that reality. That's part of what we're in. And so just taking it one quickly, and then I'll stop. We also have to recognize, any of us, and I think it probably includes all of us here, who identify on some level with the progressive communities around the world, the progressive communities. But, I've never been, if going back 20 years or so or more, I could never have imagined what the progressive community today has kind of evolved into, and in a sense has been groomed into by the deep state, the intelligence communities, and everything that they basically control. But we have a progressive community that the only thing that they seem to be motivated by day to day and emotionally about is, the demon Donald Trump. That's all it's been. He's been made into a national fetish. And this is a very unfortunate thing because, Donald Trump is probably a natural born psychopath. These kind of people thrive. The tougher situations these are the people that, Hitler came to power. Stalin eventually came to power in the Soviet Union and Russia. Mao was in power for a while. He left. He came back, though, when China was suffering in various ways. All you have to do is look at history. When things get tough and a lot of killing seems to be just under the surface, people who are psychopaths that have a lot of positive kind of personality attributes and skills, they tend to come to power because they do not have much in the way of compunctions or moral inhibitions about killing people or doing a lot of things. So at this point, I don't know how many of you watched Trump's speech the other night, which was on Fox News. Apparently CNBC didn't show it at all, and I guess CNN started showing it. But the minute that Trump's crowds started going, CNN sucks, they completely obliterated the rest of the thing. But it was instructive to listen to what he's saying and also to understand that what is going to happen between now and the 2020 election is that all of these individuals peppered throughout the FBI, the CIA, the Justice Department, a number of the politicians, etc., they are going to be ripped to shreds for trying to essentially have their soft coup concerning over, Trump and the Russian collusion. This is a narrative that's going to be completely devastating. And our progressive community, most people have no knowledge of it. I was listening to the progressive radio station in Chicago yesterday. And this guy, I forget his name, but he'd heard, Trump's speech, and he's going on, he's saying, what's wrong with Donald Trump? Donald Trump, you're not running against Hillary Clinton this time. Why are you going on about Hillary Clinton? Completely ignorant about the reason Trump is going on about Hillary Clinton, because he knows that William Barr and the Justice Department are going to go after Hillary Clinton. And they're going to go after all these other individuals because they have William Barr is not somebody who, he was always more like an establishment Republican kind of guy who operated, he was in the CIA originally. But William Barr and others have concluded that for the good of the country, even though maybe he doesn't like Trump all that much personally, but we can't have soft coups going on to alter the results of a presidential election. That's stepping too far, and it can have consequences in other ways. So I guess what I just want to wind up saying is the Democratic candidates are going to have to wrap their minds around the fact that Trump is a dangerous character, in part because he's putting into power all these Christian fundamentalists like Pompeo and Pence and others. They're throughout all sorts of institutions. And what they believe is that essentially we need to get things set up for the end times, for real. In other words, and they're delusional. It's like, I even read something the other day where they're talking about, God is going to have a separate heaven for the Jews. So the Jews will have their ghettoized heaven next to the Christian fundamentalists. But everybody, Jewish and Christian fundamentalists, gets to go up there. This is complete delusional kind of stuff. But Trump is, in order for him to go forward, he has to have the Christian fundamentalist base behind him, and they are behind him. And if you heard, I didn't hear it, but I saw a video of it. The woman who is now, Trump's a Christian fundamentalist spiritual advisor, she gave her little thing at the beginning of his speech saying, God, please protect your messenger that you've sent us, or your gift to us, Donald Trump, from the demonic attacks by, the progressive community, the Democrats, etc. We have to understand this and to go forward with climate change as a major issue, but also to understand that this religious fundamentalism, and it goes for the Jews and the Islamic stuff and the Hindu stuff, they believe in this omnipotent, omniscient God that could clean this up if he wants to. If he doesn't want to, the end times are rolling. We can't bow down to that. And one of our candidates, and it isn't going to be Biden, and it's probably not going to be Elizabeth Warren, and some of these, but somebody has to be able to really take on Trump. He's a danger, really, because of the fact that his biggest block of support is a Christian fundamentalist grouping. They have lots of power. They've, over decades, gotten themselves in many, many influential positions, and they want to have pretty much a Christian fundamentalist theocracy. Trump, I don't think, would want that. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that stuff out there and bring you up to date on some things. Thank you.
Wow, really good stuff, Dan. Really, really good monologue there. Next up in the queue is Jamin, followed by Adam, and I think we're the only two in the queue. So if you want to be in the queue, now is a great time to jump in if you have comments to make. What I'd like to comment on is on both what Miles and Fred and Dan have all talked about, and starting with Adam's comments about Canada declared a national emergency. Awesome. Just last week, Pope Francis, or maybe it was beginning of this week, Pope Francis declared a climate emergency. So we've got these declarations of climate emergency happening. That's awesome. But then 2 days later, Canada approved a Trans Mountain pipeline. Here's what I want to say, and I'm going to say this very imperfectly, so please bear with me, okay? And then add your own comments when it's your turn. But what I want to say is, imperfectly, that's not really a contradiction in the following sense, okay? Bear with me. In the following sense, the sense is as follows. We, all of us, in different ways, at different levels, are addicted to our present modality, right? When I drive somewhere later today, I'm going to burn, petroleum. And when we get off the hangout, I'm going to check the price of Bitcoin. So I'm addicted to money. I'm addicted to oil. I'm addicted to this current set of living arrangements. And I'm addicted to some non-vegan foods, okay? That, in a sense, is not a contradiction with my being aware that we're in an emergency and we need to get off of all of these addictions and radically transform everything. So it's kind of like the alcoholic who's physically addicted to and physically dependent upon alcohol going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. What are they going to do? Kick him out or bar the door? That he not letting him enter? No, it's not a contradiction. We're addicted, and we're having conversations about how to break the addictions and how to radically transform everything. That's the fundamental point I want to make. We're also addicted to tribalism, right? We and specifically a lot of institutions in this country are addicted to nationalism. And Trump is addicted to power. And if he sees war with Iran as a way of bolstering his power and getting him reelected, well, damn it, he'll start a war with Iran, right? This is all part of this present modality and culture that we've been evolving in this horrible direction in the last 10, 12,000 years, including totalitarian agriculture, pyramids of power, ownership of land and resources, dominance over other people, et cetera, et cetera. So these are addictions. This is a modality that we're all enslaved in. So whether you use addiction as your metaphor or slavery as your metaphor or whatever your metaphor, at the same time that we're currently, trapped in this destructive modality, we can and must and are here on the Social Club having conversations about how we break out of the present modality. I want to welcome my brother Evan, who just joined. Welcome.
Howdy,
Evan.
howdy.
Jump in and talk anytime. We've got a queue, and so if you want to get in the queue, you can either type in your name or just let it be known. But we're having a great conversation, so welcome. And next up in the queue is Adam. If you're ready, Adam, take it away.
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you. Hey, Evan, you might want to mute. I can hear if you can.
Oh, yeah, Evan, we all mute our microphones when we're not talking, so feel free to do that, or I can mute it for you. But thanks, Evan. Carry on.
Okay, so Fred, brought up a point about how do we all come together and what are the keys. And so the way I see it is we build a platform, and on the platform, people are able to come together because we don't have, we have all these problems, but we don't have a place to come together and meet and counsel anymore. And with our technology that we have today, we can meet and counsel together and solve these problems. But the key is that we solve the problems not in reality. We build a vision that, in my opinion, we work to build a vision in the digital world and digital reality. And by doing that, we bypass all what's really cool about it is the rest of the world that we live in doesn't have to change. So what we're doing is right now, all we have for a vision for the collapse, collapse is coming. We hear the word collapse is whispered in our ears all the time, and it's scary. And so and our vision of what the collapse will be is a horror. It's a horror vision. Well, by creating a new vision on the platform, we can replace our vision of horror with a vision of a realistic hope. And I think that's just key. The key is, so it's like we're building something. They're not trying to take over the government. We're building a vision that we can move into when the government doesn't exist anymore. So I just think that's the key. And another key that I think is, and I've already said it, is when we get on the platform together and people are grouping together in teams like think tanks, and we're working with the artificial intelligence stuff, and people are coming up, they're assigned to their own particular areas. There'll be debates over how to fix, how to make decisions. Well, what's got us into trouble in the past, or all along here, is all our decisions are all based on money. And we're not, the society we live in, we don't make logical decisions. We base our decisions on money. So if we're on the platform and we're trying to build a vision for the future, which collapse means that there won't be any money anyway. And I just showed you the population graph. We didn't live with money for hundreds of thousands of years. So we can live without money. And if you try to build money into the answer, into the vision, it makes it impossible. The people can't won't be able to come into agreement, because the first thing that'll come up is the feeling of the imbalance that money creates, the greed, the feeling, and then it comes from the concept, the misguided, misplaced concept that we have the feeling now that our sustenance comes from money. And the reality is our sustenance comes from nature. But we don't work for nature. We work for money. And so people will do anything and rationalize any way they can to get money. And that's what's destroying the world. And it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, we don't get a choice over the womb we're born out of, the life we're born into. Anybody could fill any of these positions, and we would all react the same. And that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Really good stuff. I really appreciate everyone's eloquence and candor today. It just feels like the communication is really flowing. Next up in the queue is Dan, followed by Jamin, followed by Miles. Take it away, Dan.
Yeah, so let me follow up on some of the things that Adam has been saying, and putting forward in an effective way. I don't agree with you, Adam, 100% on the money thing, but I understand what it is you're meaning. And so, I've mentioned before, and when I used to do frequent, I do them very rarely now, these mental health presentations, I used to bring up the thought experiment, where I'd say, imagine that someone was offering you to come in on a business deal, which would mean $10 million for you and your wonderful family. And the only thing that you have to understand is it's going to lead to some serious unemployment and some unfortunate environmental repercussions. But it's $10 million for you. And one more thing, there's thousands of people lined up behind you who'll be happy to take the opportunity if you don't want it. And then, go in your mind. Are you going to turn it down given that set of circumstances when there's plenty of others who are willing to step in and take advantage of that money? We have our culture, our economic system is set up to incentivize people to go against maybe some of their ethical principles to get money. And this is very, very devastating. But as long as you have a situation where, somebody's going to say, if I don't do it, somebody else will do it. It's also like here in Chicago, where we have the incredible murders and so-called, violence here in Chicago, which is mostly street gang violence with sometimes collateral damage. But what people don't seem to understand is if you arrest some street gang member, do you have any thought, given the deindustrialized Chicago and the kind of culture you've had in communities here in Chicago since the deindustrialization, that there aren't plenty of young boys just ready, looking for an opportunity to step up and step in? And so, here in Chicago, they don't want to talk about deindustrialization as being the primary cause that we have so much violence. In the 50s and 60s in Chicago, during the heyday of Chicago political corruption, the original Mayor Daley, you had very little of this kind of violence because most young people went to work in the steel mills, the factories, and all of the subsidiary companies, et cetera, that were involved in the big industry here. So you didn't have the underground drug markets and the street gang involvement. But they don't want to talk about that because actually all they talk about is too many guns, like too many guns, inadequate policing. They love to talk about all the problems with the police. Yes, guns can be a problem in some ways. Police have plenty of problems. But and the third one they like to bring up is, people in the communities need to stand up and point out who these shooters are. You know who they are. Turn them in. But they don't want to talk about the deindustrialization and the fact that there hasn't been 40 to 45% of the African American community. Males age 20 to 24 are unemployed. And the 16 to 20 demographic, it's even worse. What does anybody here in Chicago imagine, or anywhere, imagine these people are doing to make money? They're not just sitting there dying. So, the thing is, and a lot of them, of course, have legal, histories from very young ages, and they can't even get any normal work at any kind of an income. So, but they don't want to talk about deindustrialization here in Blue City, Chicago, because that would be, feeding into Trump's message that, the country was deindustrialized, eventually with the total outsourcing of industry. And, that kind of got him a lot of votes in the messed up Rust Belt states in the United States. And so, if we don't, and the same, and I go to climate change again, if we don't talk about the harsh realities that are staring us in the face realistically, that includes the time factor. We don't like to go to that time factor because, maybe Guy McPherson might be right. Maybe he is right, but maybe he's not right. And again, I say the social club came into existence on the premise that maybe Guy McPherson is wrong about the time. We still could do something. But to ignore the implosion and the exponential nature of it, the fact that it's just so easy to understand, and yet it is being censored big time by the powers that be because they fear retaliation for everything they've done to allow this to unfold. And they are worried that the economic engine will just simply fall apart if too many people started to sign on to Guy McPherson type doom stuff. So they're not going to say anything. And then we have our own problem within our own communities, who are concerned with climate change. There is still a tremendous, tremendous denial to just simply entertain that time is really short. No, it's not that we have till 2030 to get some political program in place. We don't have till 2050, or you don't see too much 2100 anymore because that's starting to seem way too unbelievable. But you have to contemplate what is really going to happen. Just like the military has already contemplated a certain kind of level of implosion. We're going to let people in other countries just simply die from it. And that'll reduce the population, by the way, going back to something that was mentioned earlier. And we're going to protect the homeland as best we can with military force. So they're not shutting their eyes to it, but you're not allowed to even know that. I didn't even realize until just recently when I was reading this book about how much has actually been going on the military front. And so, you know, we can't, you know, it's so nice to think about, maybe we could do this, and all these things are good, you know. It's like, you know, like with a vegan diet, I'm moving myself onto that, you know. I'm doing it, and of course, like anybody else, I notice that if I have a vegan meal, let's say for dinner, I feel a hell of a lot better. You know, I don't feel, you know, all of that, you know, sort of weighting me down, putting me to sleep, and all of that. You know, it makes a real difference. But you know, you have to cross a certain line and get yourself over there. Even though I've known for a long time all the rational arguments about why it's a good idea. But you know, just to conclude, you know, there's lots of very, very unpleasant things that are going to start to unfold. And we need to be able to talk in a realistic way about adaptation to reality. And if we're going to have people cooperating, as Fred said, and I've said many times, you know, the tribalism needs to be unpacked and deconstructed. And that includes the religious tribalism. It gets in the way of really very much being done. And, you know, even if nothing works out, it's at least, you know, let's try to do the things that maybe have some sort of a chance of getting that kind of cooperation and a discussion going. I'm not optimistic, obviously, but I think that we need to be realistic. We can't be afraid and you know, and be like the fundamentalists and just say, well, you know, somehow there's a God or a spirit up there that's everything will be just okay, and I can, you know, go to my heaven and you can go to your heaven and all of that. This is just like I say, it's really kind of delusional stuff. And you know, so anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you, Dan. Really good stuff. Next up in the queue is Jamin, followed by Miles, followed by Melissa, followed by Adam, followed by Fred. So we got a pretty healthy.
Can I just ask Dan a quick question? What's the name of the book, the military book that you mentioned?
I'll get that for you right now, Fred.
Okay.
And then I'll come in. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All righty. So I'm up next. So I just wanted to make a comment about what Fred had brought up and Dan a bit earlier about the time factor and the urgency. And it was brought up. Fred, you're not muted. I'm going to go ahead and mute you, but just so you know. So yes, this is, you know, the urgency. There's no way to overstate the urgency. I don't think in my lifetime or in the history of the planet have we ever been in a more urgent situation. Having said that, you know, I mean, and there's certain things that are just obvious. In all likelihood, a very multidimensional key, a complex key. There's not necessarily an easy answer, like, let's all go vegan. And I actually agree with that. Let's all go vegan. Well, how? You know, what is the key then to getting us to all go vegan? We need to get rid of money. I agree with that too. How? Right? And, you know, the urgency came up in the context of the discussion around spiritual transformation. And, you know, there was something to the effect of, we don't have time for spiritual transformation. We need to do this stuff now. We don't have time for this tribalism anymore. We need to do X, Y, and Z now. And the simple point I want to make is, here on the Social Club and in our other, you know, parallel and overlapping circles, we are groping, looking for the key that will actually start these transformations happening and hopefully get them going on in a somewhat of a virtuous cycle. All right, next up is Miles, followed by Melissa, followed by Adam, followed by Fred. Take it away, Miles.
Thank you. So I just wanted to put out there that indeed it is an emergency, and Dr. McPherson always seems to be coming up to be correct. So for example, I just saw the other day that in the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation news item, the permafrost is thawing 70 years sooner than expected. So it's funny how when just a short time ago when I first came on, it would have seemed a little bit extreme to even to us to start saying, well, we need to stop using climate warming. We need to move to the word emergency. And then, we all sort of, yeah, okay, that's true. We've got to ramp this up. Now we don't even have to ramp anything up. Like as Dan mentioned, the wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, I believe it is, where if the humidity is 100%, humans die. That's fact. That's physiology that cannot be denied. And there's parts of the planet that are hitting that wet bulb 35 Celsius right now, so and there's going to be mass movements of people. So here's another fact from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. In 2000, there was an estimated 20 million people who are living as refugees, and today it's 70 million. So yeah, it's ramping up. We don't even have to really discuss that so much anymore, but indeed the time is getting short. So the other point that I'd like to make is that we do need to move on the concept of the creative community cafes and getting people together to face to face. Now we need to think about the controls. And here's an idea that I learned from Annabelle Crop-Eared Wolf and her thesis on peacemaking and peacekeeping in the Blackfoot Nations. And there's a concept of the sacred friends. And so that's where we need to establish standards or spiritual values where anybody can come into the community cafe, and there's a lot of different perspectives that are sometimes really out there. So for example, unacknowledged special access projects, sort of what Dan's talking to. Unacknowledged special access projects. This is where, and I can produce these, your presidents have on several occasions said, for example, I think it was President Clinton around unidentified or unexplained aerial phenomena. Sarah, there's parts of the government that I don't control. That to me is, we need to move that right to the top of the agenda list is the governance. And how is it that there's presidents and, for example, Dwight D. Eisenhower warning us back in 1961, be aware, people, of the military industrial, and he would have added congressional complex if he hadn't been pressured to take out the word Congress. But anyway, I think we need to, in summary, move out from behind our microphones into the community, start face-to-face in controlled environments, and these communities become the leverage, because there's an energy that we get when we're face-to-face with people that we don't even have here. As much as this is a wonderful tool and technology, I don't think it still creates the energy that we would have if we were actually all sitting around a circular table or, having a bit of a ceremony of breaking bread and such. Thank you.
Really good stuff, Miles. In fact, I'll address the community cafe and screen share in a moment when it's my turn next. Next up in the queue is Melissa, then Adam, Fred, Jamin, and Dan. Take it away, Melissa, sweetie.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to some earlier comments. I think it was you, Jamin, who talked about this seeming contradiction that you say is possibly not a contradiction. And I just wanted to explore that a little bit and explore that with a question, which is, so how does someone come into a place where our words and our actions are in alignment? And because I'm sure that President Trudeau is aware of the potential disasters that can unfold with increased tanker traffic around the orcas. We all know that that's a very major problem. And I read in the newspaper that they're going to increase those tankers from 5 to 34, which is a huge number. In terms of increase, sounds, the potential for oil spills. So how do we get there? You know, how do all of us get there? And then I want to come back also to what you were saying, Dan, about money, and all these things are kind of paralleling. Like, I'm just thinking of an experience I had in Moscow years ago, where I was invited to do a project, and I didn't know where the money was coming from. For all I know, it could have come through an arms deal or prostitution. It could have come from something very negative. And I asked myself that question: do I still want to do this project? And the conclusion at the time that I came to was, yes, I'm going to do this project because I'm going to bring beauty and something good into a country. And one of my stipulations to my client was that he allow me to engage and hire local people so that I was sharing the money. I wasn't just hoarding it and taking it for myself. And the client did agree. And so I had 4 or 5 women who I actually trained to paint murals and things, work with me, and shared that wealth with them. And we created a very beautiful community center together using those funds. So I think, again, it's coming back to this thing of consciousness, where how do we shift into this new consciousness where we can take something that maybe has come from an ill and transform it into a good, until we can shift over into this new system or new way of, or new story of living more holistically and harmoniously in the planet. And I also think that in parallel to this, these actions that we can take through awakening ourselves and making right choices through awareness, through consciousness, is education that's going to play a major role, because we need to be teaching the children of the planet this correct or true way, as Dante would put it, of how to walk on the planet gently, lovingly, holistically, with equality, with the divine feminine, with compassion. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to put out there. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart. Next up is Adam, then Fred, Jamin, and Dan. Take it away, Adam.
When I was listening to Melissa, I heard quite a bit of interruption. Did anybody else hear that too? There's breakups, and I'm just wondering if it's my microphone or my headphones, or if other people are hearing that too.
Let's take a moment and let people answer that question. Did anyone else hear breakups while Melissa was talking? Miles seemed to hear fine. Dan seemed to hear fine. Okay, that may be unique to you, Adam. And sometimes we hear you break up a little bit, so it could be your connection. Anyway, back to you, Adam. But in general, we're hearing you fine, Adam.
Is that better?
So far, so good, Adam.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me now,
Yeah.
and see me. Or you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Well, Okay, if you can hear me, but I can't hear you, I'm going to just continue here.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Is that okay? Okay. So Melissa was asking, how do we shift to this new consciousness? And the way I see it, the life we live in, we've been trying to change it. And the result is always that we are not able to change. The environmental movements have been trying to get humanity to change for the last 50 years. And what they do is they tell us that we have to change, and they tell us what we have to change to. So they say, well, you have to reduce your carbon footprint by 50% in 20 years. What they don't tell us is, how do we do that? I mean, and the reason they don't tell us that, because they don't know how. And because in order to do that, the whole society that we live in has to change. Now, we can't tell the society that it has to change. That's been proven time and time again. So the only thing we can do, as far as I see, is get on a platform and build a vision of the change. Then, when the time comes, when there's no more government, and even before then, as people start seeing that this vision is growing, and people are saying, well, I don't think of the future in horror anymore. I think of the future, I'm positive about it, because we have a plan that we're putting together now. A full set of plans that we can work with when the lights go out. We know what to do. Now that what answers the questions. But and then people will change as the collapse gets closer, as Mother Earth screams louder and louder with this weird weather and stuff. People are going to start waking up. That's all I have. Thank you.
Beautiful, Adam. Beautiful. Next up is Fred, followed by Jamin, followed by Dan. Take it away, Fred.
I actually don't have anything to say. I don't know how you got me in the queue. You hear me?
You were waving your hand a few minutes ago, so I stuffed you.
Oh! I wanted to get that the book title from Dan.
Oh, got it. Okay, very good. All right.
Thank
You are out of the
Dan, where's the book title?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Fred, you able to see what I put up there?
I don't know if Fred has access to the comments, to the chat.
Okay, well, when I come on, I'll give you the information, Fred.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I just ask?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Vishal, would love to invite you to say something. Your younger generation, if you have any feedback about how you're moving through the world with all that's going on, and what your thoughts are for the immediate future.
And that's totally fair that you ask. I also want to just reiterate what I said at the very beginning when you weren't here, which is a fundamental premise of the social club, that no one is ever put on the spot.
Absolutely.
Or, so it's just take it as a
and you
request.
don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
All right.
Of course.
So next up in the queue is Jamin, and I've been wanting to screen share and share some stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. First, let me just make sure I'm not missing anyone in the queue. No, I think we're fine. Okay. So screen sharing. Okay. So you've heard me talk, and also Miles mentioned the community cafe. So this is something that we piloted originally down in Southern California at at a community in the Mojave Desert called Rosamond, community of about 15,000 people. In their annual parade in December 5th, 2015, we built the first community cafe to feed an entire community nutritious food for free and begin to realize this utopian vision that we have where basic human needs become basic human rights. And we see this as an important step in the direction of a world without money. And since getting to know Dr. Sailesh Rao, we've also seen it as an important vehicle for promoting veganism. And so among many other things, in fact, ending all single-use anything, making everything multi-use, and really being part of a more general transformation of the economy to a compassionate economy. And we've been developing a standard called CCC, Certified Compassionate Companies, which donate 100% of their profits to eradicating hunger. And then once you've got a big enough sector of the economy that's participating as CCC companies, and we've consistently ended hunger for all of humanity, not just in a given country, but all around the world, then surplus profits beyond what's needed to maintain the world in a state of hungerlessness can then go to other things, whether it's geoshading or cleaning up the oceans or myriad other programs that are vital for nature, for humanity, etc. The other two pillars of CCC down here at the bottom, one is that the company be socially transformational in everything that it does, and finally, ecologically regenerative, that they be healing towards Mother Nature. And we'll look at an example of that in a minute. But first, back to ending hunger, community cafes. You know, we've talked about the key, right? And how do we, begin these transformations? Adam said it very well. We've known for decades, what we need to do, but no one's telling us how, right? So we need all these transformations to happen, like I was talking about earlier in the program. This is what I believe is one component of the key, which is what we call the Hungerless Games. It's a virtuous cycle we've conceived of, where compassionate companies donate their profits to community cafes for ending hunger. And this becomes a huge story. Can you imagine when Haiti has, dozens of community cafes throughout the country, and there's no more hunger in Haiti, for example? That's going to be a heck of a story. And the question will be, well, how did that happen? Well, thank the CCC companies. That will cause more people to buy CCC and to stop buying according to the current paradigm. The first CCC company, and this gets back to the earlier point about being ecologically regenerative. How do you be ecologically regenerative and make money, profits that can be donated to ending hunger? Enter Sato Hemp, the world's first CCC company, which is a Japanese hemp fashion house headed by my brother Takuya Sato, whose family, the Sato family, has the longest legacy of hemp in the world, going back over a dozen generations. Takuya Sato is the Hemperor of Japan, and as such is in a very powerful position to promote this new standard. Hemp is, of course, a regenerative material. Again, look at the very bottom here, ecologically regenerative. Hemp returns nutrients to the soil, uses a fraction of the water that cotton uses, and cotton is the #1 offender crop in terms of use of agricultural chemicals, which are damaging to Mother Earth. Hemp uses none of those. So anyway, I just wanted to show the community cafe, the CCC standard, the Hungerless Games, and an example of a CCC company as perhaps the beginning of a key to making this whole transformation happen. So I wanted to comment on that. And then also, another big part of it is collective intelligence itself. And as Adam mentioned, we have the opportunity to co-create a vision for what the world can be. Adam talks about coming up with a plan for post-collapse. I would actually like to come up with a plan for pre-collapse so that we can actually avert the worst kind of collapse that is at our doorstep, and come up with a vision for how we can transform the world today, leveraging the myriad assets that are currently in place that would be destroyed upon collapse. Everything from, modern industry and manufacturing that can produce the infrastructure of geoshading that we so vitally need to survive, and also build out a full plan. What I just screen shared is part of the plan. We need a full enchilada plan, full meal deal. That's it for my comments at the moment. Next up is Dan. Take it away, Dan.
Okay, so I don't see Fred there right now. So let me just give the information. Fred can check it out on the video if he needs to.
I'll email it to Fred. But anyway, go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
You're going to email it? Well, I'll just say, anyway, Fred, the name of the book is Storming the Wall, Climate Change, Migration, and Homeland Security by Todd Miller. I mentioned the thought experiment that I, would use. And here's, kind of another one where, just based on kind of what I've been talking about or we're discussing, imagine this. You and your wonderful family are told you can stay here in the homeland, the United States, and have food and water so that you can stay alive. But in order for that to happen, we're going to prevent third world populations from coming in here. Because if we let them in, it'll be a problem. There won't be enough. And by the way, if you don't like this generous offer of being able to stay here, then you need to leave. And at a certain point, you can easily see, and if you start to propagandize against what we have to do so that we Americans can survive, then we'll remove you. You won't be having any voice at all. And so, again, this is something the military, the deep state, many academicians understand what is coming. Now, they don't sign on to, obviously, if they all signed on to Guy McPherson 2026, there's absolutely nothing to be done. They wouldn't be making preparations for all of the droughts and floods and starvation conditions among populations around the world to keep them out, let them die, obvious, that kind of thing. So they don't have a 2026 time frame. But so they're operating in a very realistic way from their point of view, and they have no interest under those kind of conditions with the survival of everybody in the world. And so, we need to be realistic, maybe more realistic than they are, in the sense that Guy McPherson, hopefully he's not correct with that time frame. And we're just going to, exponentially, suddenly everything is just going to go very, very quickly. But we have to be realistic that exponential is real. It's undergirded by all of these positive feedback loops. Guy McPherson in his, I forgot what he called it, but his long essay that's up there on his website, I think at that time was talking about maybe 62 or 63 positive feedback loops. that are there and have been operating. You know, the one where you have the methane coming out of the melting Siberia and the Arctic is just one of those feedback loops. You know, makes it hotter, more melt, more goes up. But you've got them all over the place. And so in order to have any chance of cooperation in doing something, you have to say that, you know, this is last ditch kind of thing. We can't delude ourselves, have nice fantasies that, oh, you know, somehow technology will come along by 2050 and rescue everybody. And we just need to do what we do. And we need to, you know, worry about getting Trump out in 2020, you know. I mean, this is a terrible diversion of finite energies, emotional and cognitive. And you know, so I don't, you know, again, I thought that I noticed when Greta Thunberg first gave her message, like, you know, we're upset with all you adults. You know, this is really a serious thing, and we need you to be worried. We need you to be as anxious as I am, and the children are. But and you know, and she got a lot of play. Got to speak to, you know, august bodies of power elites around the world. But the problem is, once she started to talk a little bit like Guy McPherson, that's it. You know, we can't have that going on. And again, it just, if you use common sense, they can't have Guy McPherson-esque stuff going on, because they rightly appreciate that if suddenly the masses, the educated masses in particular, the middle class, the upper middle class, the professional people, the people who keep the economic engines turning in our society, keep so-called civilization going. If they understand, they actually start to believe that Guy McPherson could be right, then immediately there's going to be vengeance taken before the full implosion against all those individuals who have consciously prevented populations from understanding the true dangers back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., when there was plenty of time to turn the thing around. Those people will be taken out one way or the other long before the actual end. And the other thing is, of course, then the economic engine will stop. I taught, you know, my PCP, when I was talking to her, I was getting a yearly physical. And you know, when I told her, and she's a, you know, highly educated woman and very tuned into progressive health and all of that. And I was telling her about, you know, the climate change. She just suddenly, you know, she said, well, if that's what it is, I don't know why I continue to work. You know, in other words, why do I want to continue on my treadmill, making the money, doing what I do, you know, et cetera, if that's what is there. And then, you know, of course, she didn't, you know, obviously change her life in any way, shape, or form over what I might be mentioning. But the thing is, that is a risk, that the economic, you know, people will just say, you know, what the hell? Why should, you know, if we're going to be done, and it won't be what Guy McPherson's fantasy is. Suddenly everybody's going to come together and we're all going to love one another and you know, talk to people and everything. It won't be like that. It will be more like what the military thinking is. And it won't be pretty. And in a city like Chicago, you know, again, it's just like what happened in New Orleans when Katrina hit. If you suddenly had a problem with fresh water being pumped into homes, and the foods, the groceries no longer have their elaborate stocked shelves, people are going to be roaming around, taking whatever they can from other people, and also having vengeance. You know, there's a lot of, in a city like Chicago, we have a lot of racial tribalism, goes way back. And, you know, it's just, Now, you know, these aren't pretty things to think about. They're not nice. But in order to, you know, get people to cooperate, they have to recognize the seriousness of it. And also, as I've said for years, have an opportunity to discuss what kind of human being do you really want to be if it goes down the unfortunate way. How do you want to be? Do you want to be Mad Max? Is that how you want to be? Do you want to go to cannibalism and start, well, we got a lot of people. We're not going to, you know, bother with eating cow meat and pig meat, but we got plenty of human beings, you know, we can go Soylent Green and Mad Max. You know, and a lot of people in our modern civilized world do not like to imagine that kind of stuff, that this could ever be. But we need to be able to discuss on one level, how do we want to be if it is starting to go down? How do we want to be as human beings? And if you don't have any rehearsal or preparation for that, or understanding of any of that, you know, it'll go down instinctively. And there's, you know, the violence that's latent in humanity. I mean, just look at history. You know, it's so
Dan,
clear.
you got so many points that you know, nobody can respond to all your points.
Okay, I'm done. I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dan. And I just want to comment. I haven't been tracking time today because in my experience, things have been flowing really well with this conversation. But we can have that conversation about whether to track time or not. But anyway, Adam, you're next up in the queue. Take it away, Adam.
Okay, so all these things that Dan says we need to do, and everybody says we need to do, we're not going to do them. We've already been trying to get people to do stuff, and they don't do them. I think the key is we have to realize that, but on the platform, we can build a vision for what the future would be, and we have to build it based on what the future calls for. So when the collapse comes, the Extinction Rebellion and you know, all those people, Greta Thunberg, they want humanity. They want us adults to come up with a plan, and that plan will have to deal with abrupt climate change. And so we're going to be looking at a food supply that's 10% of what we've got now. So we have to plan for that. This is an emergency. You know, we don't plan. We don't think about change and forget about trying to change everything. It's not going to work. We build a plan that works, and then and as people see that plan can work as different as it is, as different as it looks. It's not built for us. It's built so that our children can have a sustainable future. And so we build it. And Jamin, you got these ideas for community cafes and CCC corporations, and they're great ideas, but they're just ideas like everybody else's.
Hey, Adam, you're breaking up real bad. One suggestion is maybe turn off your video, and then we can channel your limited bandwidth to audio so we can hear you.
Okay, is that working any better?
Way better, way better. Okay, if you could back up about half a minute. You were, the last thing we heard you say was, you know, Jamin, you've got some ideas, community cafe, but they're just ideas. Anyway, no better than anyone else's. But carry on.
Yeah, so we need a place to submit all ideas and then evaluate them. So you have your I call them topic teams that are like think tanks, and they work with our modern computer processing which is very good, and the latest technologies on this platform. And then they decide. I mean, all of humanity should be able to come to this platform and submit their own ideas. And then the ideas all get analyzed, and the best ideas and how it all works in the model. That's what tells us. That's what tells us what to do. There's and about the one thing I wanted to say is that you talked about, Jamie, you talked about post-collapse and pre-collapse, and you would rather, you would rather develop something that would happen before the collapse happens. And I agree with you. I would too. But so if we develop this plan that works, and the only way I see it working before the collapse is everybody, looks at it and says, yeah, that's a great plan. And if enough people come on board and say, yeah, let's do it, that'll save our lives. I mean, that's the answer. Then we could collectively, as a human race on Earth, decide to change. But without a plan to change to, we don't know what to change to. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
No, totally agree, Adam. We've that's the urgency here. Today we've talked about the key. What is the key to getting humanity to transform? And a plan. The key, the plan. We're really talking about the same thing here. I couldn't agree more. If we have a plan that people can see that makes sense, now we have something that people can transform to, or a plan for transformation. So I totally agree with you there. And right now, at this moment, we don't have a key, we don't have a plan, and that's why we're here. And we've been here on the Social Club for 2 years now, working on this. That's not a criticism of us. We're not the only group or community in the world focused on how do we save ourselves, save life on Earth, and transform. But it's just a commentary on how challenging, apparently, this is. And, big challenges require big solutions. Big solutions require big intelligence. And that's, therefore, one of our primary foci is how do we co-create this collective intelligence? How do we architect and build the platform? How do we bring together the community that constitutes this collective intelligence so that we can come up with the plan, so that we can devise the key, come up with the strategy, etc. Anyway, there's no one currently in the queue, so I'm just going to throw it open.
It seems,
actually, Fred's waving his hand. Jump in, Fred. Love to hear from you.
So, have we recognized human behavior? I mean, the way people actually respond to things and how they learn is like, I was just thinking, you can tell somebody if you put your hand near a flame, it'll be warm. If you put your hand on the flame, you'll get burned. The thing that concerns me is, are we going to have a crushing disaster before people really get it? Because human behavior does not respond to verbal lessons. I've just spent a lot of time with graduating high school students, and I know that, I can give them all the wisdom in the world, but they've got to go out and learn it for themselves. And I'm concerned that, until the water's in the living room, nobody's going to really understand the urgency. That's human nature. So how do we address that? That's human nature. How does, and fear is a very motivating factor, but obviously you can't go out on national communication services or whatever and tell everybody that get it together or we're all going to die. I mean, you know, a message as stark as that, people are just, they're either going to, you know, freeze or they're going to get crazy. So I mean, I think that's a real issue, human response to crisis. Whatever.
Yeah, I'll comment.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Love your comments, Fred. I wish you'd comment more. Adam, I know, has something to say. I just wanted to squeeze in a quick comment on that, is that fortunately and unfortunately, and Fred, just a reminder to please mute your microphone when you're not talking. Fortunately and unfortunately, the water is in the living room for a lot of communities around the world. Vishal's parents are from northern India. Northern India is on fire right now with heat and drought. Victoria, who's normally on the program, lives in Oklahoma. Talk about water being in living rooms. It was in, I don't know, a significant percentage of living rooms in Oklahoma recently. The coastlines all around the world are getting battered from higher energy storms and rising sea levels. So the water's in the living room. So it doesn't have to be a theoretical. We're going to have to wait. We don't have to wait any longer. It's here. Now the question is, Fred, it looks like you're trying to talk, but you're muted. Go ahead, Fred. Fred, you're still muted. I'm sure you're saying brilliant things. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, for clarity, the global living room. It's happening in pockets, but you know, until everybody experiences the pain, I don't know if people are going to be galvanized into doing something effective. I mean, how many disasters do we have to see in the United States alone before we can grasp the urgency? I mean, it's all over the world, but apparently, you know, there's no consensus internationally on the urgency, the need to, yeah. Anyway, that's all. I meant global living room.
Yeah, your point is well taken. In terms of international consensus, and I know you want to speak, Adam, but I just want to carry on with Fred for a moment here. In terms of international consensus, let's not confuse two things. One is international consensus and agreement among governments. Another is international consensus, period, right? I think we're rapidly building towards international consensus that we've got a serious crisis here among people generally. The governments of the world are packed with addicts to power, addicts to money, addicts to whatever's going to get them reelected, whether it's war with Iran or, you know, demonizing Hillary Clinton and others who tried to impeach Trump, whatever, you know. So I'm kind of writing off the governments. I sort of hate to say it, but I think we're going to need serious cultural transformation to induce serious political transformation. But I think the cultural transformation is coming fast and furious as the world is, as the people of the world, not the governments, but the people of the world are recognizing the urgency and the state of emergency and the water in their own living rooms. Adam, take it away, Adam, if you still wanted to comment.
Yeah, I do. We don't have we live in this world that's just really confusing and it's got control of us and we're under pressure and everything's artificial. The way we think is artificial. We think we work for money and money is our sustenance, but it's not. Our real sustenance comes from nature. So we this world, we don't have any way to protect ourselves. I mean, and we don't, humanity doesn't have a place to go to meet in council. And we don't have a place to go that where we can get rid, be rid of and make of influences like money. And so we can make logical decisions. I mean, governments meet together in council. Corporations meet together in council. Indian tribes, they meet together in council. Humanity doesn't meet together in council. We don't get to come together and talk. And on the platform, we can do this. With modern technology, we can do it. And the way that everybody can communicate together is everybody's equal. So everybody's vote is equal. But the way they do it is the way I see it working is you get on the platform and you fill out a whole bunch of questions, and they're designed so that they can fit into the model. And so say 10,000 people join the platform, and they each fill out a questionnaire with 1,000 questions on it each. Well, now you've got 10,000 profiles of people. Well, the computer system extrapolates those and provides and fills in temporary profiles for the rest of the people of the world. Now you've got a profile of the world, and that can be put in the model. And as more people come, the profiles of the world get better. That's how you develop a new. I think that's how you get out of it. I don't think we'll be able to change anybody or change anything any other way. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. No one's in the queue right now that I can see. Let me verify. Dan.
Yeah.
Dan's in the queue. Take it away, Dan.
Okay, this will be my last input. So let me kind of go off of something Fred was just saying, where, if you suddenly announce Guy McPherson's right, sorry, folks, get ready. Here's the thing, and about, Fred talking, you were talking about, you hold your hand over the flame, it's going to be one thing. You actually put your hand on the flame. Or I used to make the point, again, and in my presentations, I'd say, when I was talking about emotional pain being very similar to physical pain, if you put your hand on a hot burner, you're going to remove it very quickly, because that intense pain is a signal to you that your tissues are going to be damaged and you may not have a functional hand. Emotional pain is the same way. If you are feeling anxiety, shame, sadness, if you're feeling, certain kinds of anger, negative emotional pain is just like physical pain. When it's intense, it's a signal to you that something is wrong in the way you're taking care of yourself, and you'd better change it up, or the emotional pain will cause you to suffer a breakdown, a full-blown breakdown, which has unfortunate outcomes, sometimes with suicide or incarceration, etc. But the thing is, you have to respect your emotional pain. What most people do in a lot of communities, especially ones that are near poverty or poverty, they find ways to partially anesthetize the emotional pain in order to prevent a breakdown. They do it through alcohol, other drugs. They watch TV, use comfort foods. They got all sorts of means, to do it. And that is what they are doing by having these unhealthy maladaptive lifestyles is preventing full-blown breakdowns. And of course, we can find lots of analogs in what people who are living in much better middle class, upper middle class, and above circumstances do also to try to mitigate, partially anesthetize the pain. I would argue we need to feel the pain, and you need to understand what it really means, and you also need to know how to manage it. So if you get told, you know, Guy McPherson might be right, or maybe he's wrong on the time, and, you know, so on. But if you understand how dangerous things are really right now, just like you hear somebody breaking into your home, you'll be immediately galvanized to do something. Hopefully you don't freeze up, but you know, the issue is people need to open themselves up to the negative emotional reaction to reality. And they need to understand how to manage it as best they can, and also to realize that it is, you know, you have to change up the circumstances that are causing you to have the emotional pain. And you know, at the end of the day, yeah.
What about our need to release? I mean, anthropology tells us that our ancestors, we've been using different types of drugs and alcohol throughout history. It's part of our nature, actually. And I mean, if we don't release, if we don't find that release at sometimes, then it comes out in other ways, and we become workaholics, or you know, something like that. I think we need to release once in a while.
Yeah, Adam, I don't disagree with, and I've never had any kind of problem with people, you know, fully aware adults using drugs, or people drinking. But, you know, you still have to place the use of alcohol and drugs in a certain context, and to understand the benefits and the potential costs. But what I'm saying is this, you know, when I heard Guy McPherson and Dar Jamal back in 2015 tell me in one of their, you know, interviews that yeah, you know, it looks like humans are going to probably go extinct, you know, 2030, give or take 9 years. And I basically, you know, I was stunned by it, you know, and I had to slowly recognize the reality that what these guys were saying actually made really sense. I mean, it was, you know, it's evidence that's out there that you can see, and the thing is, it's not like since that time I've had a breakdown or anything. I still go on with normalcy as best I can. We can't get away from it. I got to get up in the morning. I have to deal with things and people and so on. But what has to happen is you have to understand that there is a realistic threat that is out there. Maybe we can protect ourselves from it. Maybe, hopefully, sorry, Guy McPherson, but hopefully we could do something. But if we don't allow ourselves to see what it is and how pressing it is and how little time there probably is, and it isn't just extinction, you know, how pleasant would it be living in a completely authoritarian, probably pretty brutal military state? Do you want to have that happen? Maybe it's inevitable, or other things. But the reality is, if we don't understand what the threat is realistically, I don't know how we really do anything. And I find, what it's just so disheartening to me is that even though now, because 2019 summer right now in the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere had a hard time. We're going to have a hard time as this one unfolds, and next year it'll be even worse. Who knows what's going to be coming? So the thing is, we have a very small window where something could be done, and like I say, as you said earlier, Jamin, how are the cryptocurrencies doing today? And other people, how are the grain futures doing today? The weather's not so good out there. That's great. I mean, people, betting on sporting events, watching sports, participating in sports. None of these things, there's nothing wrong with all of these things. But again, there's a certain element of the activity which we all need. We do need, I think, as you put it, Adam, an outlet or something to relieve, temporarily the stress. But when it becomes, kind of every day, one thing or another to divert attention from what's coming. I remember the little, fairy tale or whatever it was, of the three pigs, the one builds his house of straw, I think the other of wood, and then the one with the bricks, and there's a kind of ethical message in there. Well, the wolf is coming. And it's important that we embrace to some degree the true fear and other negative emotions that can get in there of what the threat means. And we still have time, even if we can't save the planet, to be able to really deal with the important issue of, if things are going to disintegrate, we're going to have collapse. And Adam, you bring up, let's get prepared in some ways for a collapse. Well, people need to be emotionally prepared for certain conditions in terms of, how do you want to be? Do I want to take a gun and go to my neighbor and shoot them and take their food from my wonderful family? Or do I want to pay back people who I've hated for a long time? I mean, we have to, if you don't rehearse how you want to be in a given circumstance, the probability of you acting in anything other than an instinctive fashion is very low.
That's what the platform does, though, is give us a place to rehearse. So, I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, no, rehearsal is necessary, and I think it would be very useful to be able to start to talk about on one level, what do we do as things start to evolve into a dystopia? However, whatever the time span is, how do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? Am I prepared to let myself die rather than go Mad Max on people? These are the kinds of things you kind of have to wrestle with. Am I prepared to throw in with a bunch of people? Maybe I don't feel like I can do Mad Max personally, but there's plenty of people who can. Maybe I need to get behind them, and maybe that's the way to go. There's a lot of things that people can address now and talk about. And on the last one, and then I'm done. And I brought this up way back in the beginning of the social club, when I said, if I were a young person, I don't think I'd want to have children for at least maybe 4 or 5 years, so I could actually see if there is an exponential thing going on. Because do I ever want to get to the point where I have to make decisions, what's the best way to put my children down? Like you would a dog or a pet, a cat. These are the kinds of things that, people, they're horrible, they're unpleasant. But at the end of the day, if you don't think about certain things, you're not going to be able to cope or to deal with, when they break into your house. You can't be paralyzed. You can't. You have to know. This is what I'm going to do in this given circumstances, whether I succeed or not. But at least I know what to do. And preparation and rehearsal is just a part of life. Athletes rehearse for their performances. People, obviously, performers rehearse for the. Rehearsal is just a natural human thing to get you prepared so that you can deal with stressful circumstances. Anyway, that's my final.
Dan, what Guy McPherson and all these doomsday prophecies, they're all based on things like they assume that humanity cannot change. They say, we have to do things like remove carbon from the atmosphere, and that is very expensive. Or it kind of doesn't work because it takes so much energy to remove carbon from the atmosphere. But if we on the platform, if we were able to do our own research instead of having to believe what we're being told, that there is no energy source out there. If we can do our own research on the platform and we find out that there is, it doesn't mean that we make it happen. It means we put that into the vision, into the plan set. And and pretty soon people will be looking and they'll say, hey, look, they've got a plan because they know how to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And they've modeled it, and they also know how to refreeze the Arctic. These are two major changes, and they know how to. They've provided a place that humanity can come together, because the basic element of humans is that we're good. We all are good. What's screwed up is this world that we live in. It's we all want to survive the future. We want the future to be here for our children. And so we're gonna join something that brings us together to do that. That's all I'm going to say.
I've got to go.
So do I.
Yeah. So just my final thing is, again, with Guy McPherson. Guy McPherson believes we're in what he calls, a predicament. There is no solution. For example, the global dimming effect. If you start to reduce, the particulates up in the atmosphere, things are going to heat up radically, and that'll be a tremendous feedback. But I just want to say that yes, we do need to be able to get mentally, emotionally prepared for whatever. But if people don't know even what the real nature of the threat is, it's impossible for them to behave in a decent, positive way or in a very negative way. And right now, I just don't.
But there's
see that.
always going to be those people. We are not going to be able to get rid of those people. There's only not, but there are enough of us who will help, who do know, that will join and start building this vision. And then as Mother Earth keeps screaming at us and her voice keeps getting louder, then we're gonna, then people will be searching for the way out. And if we provide that, they'll come to it. But they don't have anything to come to right now. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. That Guy McPherson, he's a climate scientist, but he's not an expert in everything. I mean, he says that hope. He quotes from an old movie and says that hope is will drive you crazy. Well, that's not necessarily true at all. But yet we're because he's a professor, we're taking his word as truth, and I don't think we should do that.
Goodbye.
Hey, great to see you, Fred.
Jamin, I'll talk to you later.
All right, bro. Talk to you later.
Bye, Adam. Vishal.
All right. Thanks, Fred. Thanks so much. See you soon. Yeah, to build on what Adam was commenting, you know, the way I see it, even if we're a tiny minority who get it and get the imperative to build a plan, the urgency to build a plan, part of that plan, let's say it's 1% of humanity comes together, which is actually a gigantic number, you know, 75 million people, right? I'd be happy with 0.1% at this point, frankly. Let's say it's 0.1%, 7.5 million people coming together to build a plan. That plan can include recruiting the rest of humanity. If we get 7.5 million really bright, engaged, awake, passionate people together who are willing to cooperate and co-create together, and we have a platform that enables them to do that, then I think we can create a heck of a plan that'll recruit a lot more. Let's say we come up with a plan to grow from 0.1% to 1% of humanity, from 7.5 million to 75 million. With 75 bright, enlightened people participating, imagine what we can create. We can probably create an even better plan that'll recruit 750 million. Now we're at a full 10%, and so on. But the key is we've got to start. Well, the Social Club is a start. Radish is a start. Adam, what you're developing is a start. A lot of us are working on the starter elements to all this. And time is also running out. So it's a race against the clock at this point. Can we get enough of us together working on enough of a platform that we can then grow this thing? Hopefully geometrically, hopefully exponentially.
That's what I'm working on.
Yep, I'm right there with you, brother.
Yep. I think we can do it. I mean, I think it's doable. What Guy McPherson doesn't take into account is that many, if not all, of these so-called predicaments can be resolved. We just don't know how to do it yet. But we haven't joined the collective human intelligence. We haven't put the chi together. I call it collective human intelligence, chi. And we haven't come together and put our mental minds, you know, our capabilities of intelligence and everything together to find out and use our computer processing that's so good today and all this data that we have. We haven't put this all together. And everything's kept secret from us, and we're being told we have to believe it. Well, I don't think that's true. I agree with you. I don't think that the elite and even the military or the people in government, they don't know what to do either. So if we come together and make a plan, get a plan going, I think everybody will be interested.
Yeah, over time, incrementally, and hopefully exponential incremental, because that's what the fundamental natural time frame is demanding, is exponential. Whoa, man. Really good stuff. We've been at it for almost 3 hours now on today's session. So, I mean, recording for closer to 2.5, but we've been together now for almost 3. Hi. All right. Shall we wrap it up, Adam? It's just you and me now.
I'm good. Yeah, we can wrap it. I've got other stuff to do.
Okay. Any questions or comments that you can see that we should address while we're here?
Well, I would just say that I am working on on developing this A World Without Money website. And it's going to be and I'm trying to develop this 501c3 corporation, so I'm applying for that. That's a lot of work. And but when I get this all together, my mission here is to educate humanity on how we can get out of this mess, and also provide the means for humanity to join. And that is, I'm gonna set up donations so that I can, not me, but the business of A World Without Money, which is nonprofit, can collect money and go to an internet platform developer, and with enough money and estimates for how much people would pay per month, and acquire, and it may take a lot of money. That's why I need the 501c3 status, so that tax deductible contributions can be given. Because I'm going to ask for millions of dollars. I want big contributions. I want to be able to walk into a platform developer's office with $7.7 billion in my briefcase, and estimates for another $7.7 billion per year that would be come in from the monthly fees that people pay for a website where we can develop. It'd be the best money they ever spent in their life. I know it's pie in the sky, but I don't see any other way to go.
Yeah, we definitely need a platform. Let me ask Adam a different question. Are there any comments or questions that people have typed in through the interface that we might want to address?
Well, that's a good question. Let me look here. Well, let me just ask, does anybody have anything they want to ask? A point they want to make? Or we got a few triple C's are good. Somebody asked, what's the Dark Mountain Project?
Dark Mountain. Well, they may be asking about the oil pipeline in Canada, which has the name Mountain in its name.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I don't know. I don't have specifics on that. I'd have to look at it. Let's just look.
Somebody says, have you ever thought of interviewing someone like Derek Jensen to bring more attention to your channel? I don't know if they're asking us that question, or you, or somebody else.
Yeah, no, I think they're asking us for the social club.
Okay.
I've definitely heard the name. It sounds like a climate person, but I don't know them and haven't thought about interviewing them specifically. But I'd love to interview different folks. In fact, we're going to be starting a podcast soon for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So good stuff there.
Oswald Spengler says that Adam Thomas. Is Jamin familiar with Paul Kingsnorth's The Dark Mountain Project? Now, Oswald says at Adam Thomas. Does he mean me, Adam Soul?
Here, let's look it up. It's called the Dark Mountain Project. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, Paul Kingsnorth's. It's Kingsnorth, North, the Dark Mountain Project.
Okay, I'm looking it up right now. So there's a manifesto, the Dark Mountain Manifesto. Let me just read from this for a moment. The manifesto, this is where it all began. A self-published pamphlet born out of 2 years of conversations. You can read the full context, full text here, which includes an essay. All right, where's the manifesto? Uncivilization, the Dark Mountain Manifesto. Rearmament. These grand and fatal movements toward death, the grandeur of the mass, makes pity a fool. The tearing pity for the atoms of the mass, the persons, the victims, makes it seem monstrous. To admire the tragic beauty they build. Okay, this is a quote from a 1935 poem. Okay, going to the manifesto itself. Chapter 1, Walking on Lava. The end of the human race will be that it will eventually die of civilization. That's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Those who witness extreme social collapse at first hand seldom describe any deep revelation about the truths of human existence. What they do mention, if is asked, is their surprise at how easy it is to die. The pattern of ordinary life in which so much stays the same from one day to the next disguises the fragility of its fabric. I certainly agree with that. How many of our activities are made possible by the impression of stability that pattern gives? This is good stuff. So long as it repeats or varies steadily enough, we are able to plan for tomorrow as if all the things we rely on and don't think about too carefully will still be here. When the pattern is broken by civil war or natural disaster or the smaller scale tragedies that tear at its fabric, many of those activities become impossible or meaningless, while simply meeting needs we once took for granted may occupy much of our lives. What war correspondents and relief workers report is not only the fragility of the fabric, but the speed with which it can unravel. As we write this, no one can say with certainty where the unraveling of the financial and commercial fabric of our economies will end. Meanwhile, beyond the cities, unchecked industrial exploitation frays the material basis of life in many parts of the world.
So, Jamin, can you go back to the part where he said that that things are staying the same? That is,
Yeah.
because that's not true.
No. Yeah, I think you're missing the point that they're making. Let me read it again, okay? The pattern of ordinary life in which so much stays the same from one day to the next disguises the fragility of its fabric. He's saying what you're saying, Adam, is that this is extremely fragile, about to fall apart, okay? How many of our activities are made possible by the impression of stability that pattern gives? So long as it repeats or varies steadily enough, we are able to plan for tomorrow as if all the things we rely on and don't think about too carefully will still be there. How many people are planning their 401ks for 20 years in the future, assuming life is going to be fundamentally the same?
The thing is, it's not the same. It's changing dramatically. Every generation faces a brand new change, a new life. I mean,
it's not just every generation. Every week we're seeing dramatic changes. So
it's huge.
So Adam, you and I and the authors of this manifesto are in violent agreement. They're not saying things stay the same. They're saying, look at how rapidly this thing can unravel. We're in violent agreement, Adam.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
continue reading, or shall we stay in the violence of our agreement?
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Precarious. Let's see. Okay. As we write this, no one can say with certainty where the unraveling of the financial and commercial fabric of our economies will end. Meanwhile, beyond the cities, unchecked industrial exploitation frays the material basis of life in many parts of the world and pulls at the ecological systems which sustain it. Precarious as this moment may be, however, an awareness of the fragility of what we call civilization is nothing new. Few men realize, wrote Joseph Conrad in 1896, that their life and the very essence of their character, their capabilities, and their audacities are only the expression of their belief in the safety of their surroundings. Conrad's writings exposed the civilization exported by European imperialists to be little more than a comforting illusion, not only in the dark, unconquerable heart of Africa, but in the whited sepulchres of their capital cities. The inhabitants of that civilization believed blindly in the irresistible force of its institutions and its morals, in the power of its police and of its opinion. So Oswald says, let me just say what Oswald, who's watching now, is saying. Never mind, I guess he hasn't. Okay, so the question is, have I seen The Dark Mountain? Well, I'm seeing it for the first time. I think this is fascinating, so I'm going to keep reading. Oswald says, let's see. Anita says, Derek Jensen's channel, Deep Green Resistance. Deep Green Resistance. Well, love to have Derek Jensen on the program, either the Social Club or a podcast we're going to be announcing fairly soon in the coming weeks. That's more for interviews and such, and roundtables. Let's see. Their confidence could be maintained only by the seeming solidity of the crowd of like-minded believers surrounding them. Outside the walls, the wild remained as close to the surface as blood under their skin. Okay, you need to go at them. That's fine. I'm going to read on a little bit here, just to since we're in the midst of this Dark Mountain thing. But anyway, great stuff, man.
I'll talk to you later.
All right, man. Talk to you soon. Outside the walls, the wild remained as close to the surface as blood under skin, though the city dweller was no longer equipped to face it directly. Bertrand Russell caught this vein in Conrad's worldview, suggesting that the novelist thought of civilized and morally tolerable human life as a dangerous walk on a thin crust of barely cooled lava, which at any moment might break and let the unwary sink into fiery depths. What both Russell and Conrad were getting at was a simple fact which any historian could confirm. Human civilization is an intensely fragile construction. It is built on little more than belief. Belief in the rightness of its values, belief in the strength of its system of law and order, belief in its currency, above all, belief in its future. Once that belief begins to crumble, the collapse of a civilization may be unstoppable. That civilization's fall, sooner or later, is as much a law of history as gravity is a law of physics. What remains after the fall is a wild mixture of cultural debris, confused and angry people whose certainties have betrayed them, and those forces which were always there, deeper than the foundations of the city walls, the desire to survive and the desire for meaning. It is, it seems, our civilization's turn to experience the inrush of the savage and the unseen. Our turn to be brought up short by contact with untamed reality. There is a fall coming. We live in an age in which familiar restraints are being kicked away and foundations snatched from under us. After a quarter century of complacency in which we were invited to believe in bubbles that would never burst, prices that would never fall, the end of history, the crude repackaging of the triumphalism of Conrad's Victorian twilight, hubris has been introduced to Nemesis. Now a familiar human story is being played out. It is the story of an empire corroding from within. It is the story of a people who believed for a long time that their actions did not have consequences. It is the story of how that people will cope with the crumbling of their own myth. It is our story. This time, the crumbling empire is the unassailable global economy and the brave new world of consumer democracy being forged worldwide in its name. Upon the indestructibility of this edifice, we have pinned the hopes of this latest phase of our civilization. Now, its failure and fallibility exposed, the world's elites are scrabbling frantically to buoy up an economic machine which, for decades, they told us needed little restraint, for restraint would be its undoing. Uncountable sums of money are being funneled upwards in order to prevent an uncontrolled explosion. The machine is stuttering, and the engineers are in panic. They are wondering if perhaps we do not understand it as well as they imagined. They are wondering whether they are controlling it or whether perhaps it is controlling them. Increasingly, people are restless. The engineers group themselves into competing teams, but neither side seems to know what to do, and neither seems much different from the other. Around the world, discontent can be heard. The extremists are grinding their knives and moving in as the machine's coughing and stuttering exposes the inadequacies of the political oligarchies who claimed to have everything in hand. Old gods are rearing their heads, and old answers. Revolution, war, ethnic strife. Politics, as we have known it, totters like the machine it was built to sustain. In its place could easily arise something more elemental with a dark heart. As the financial wizards lose their powers of levitation, as the politicians and economists struggle to conjure new explanations, it starts to dawn on us that behind the curtain, at the heart of the Emerald City, sits not the benign and omnipotent invisible hand we had been promised, but something else entirely. Something responsible for what Marx, writing not so long before Conrad, cast as the everlasting uncertainty and anguish of the bourgeois epoch, a time in which all that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned. Draw back the curtain, follow the tireless motion of cogs and wheels back to its source, and you will find the engine driving our civilization, the myth of progress. The myth of progress is to us what the myth of God-given warrior prowess was to the Romans, or the myth of eternal salvation was to the conquistadors. Without it, our efforts cannot be sustained. On the root stock of Western Christianity, the Enlightenment, at its most optimistic, grafted a vision of an earthly paradise toward which human effort, guided by calculative reason, could take us. Following this guidance, each generation will live a better life than the life of those that went before it. History becomes an escalator, and the only way is up. On the top floor is human perfection. It is important that this should remain just out of reach in order to sustain the sensation of motion. Recent history, however, has given this mechanism something of a battering. The past century too often threatened a descent into hell rather than the promised heaven on earth. Even within the prosperous and liberal societies of the West, progress has, in many ways, failed to deliver the goods. Today's generation are demonstrably less content and consequently less optimistic than those that went before. They work longer hours with less security and less chance of leaving behind the social background into which they were born. They fear crime, social breakdown, overdevelopment, environmental collapse. They do not believe that the future will be better than the past. Individually, they are less constrained by class and convention than their parents or grandparents, but more constrained by law, surveillance, state proscription, and personal debt. Their physical health is better, their mental health more fragile. Nobody knows what is coming. Nobody wants to look. Most significantly of all, there is an underlying darkness at the root of everything we have built. Outside the cities, beyond the blurring edges of our civilization, at the mercy of the machine, but not under its control, lies something that neither Marx nor Conrad, Caesar nor Hume, Thatcher nor Lenin ever really understood. Something that Western civilization, which has set the terms for global civilization, was never capable of understanding, because to understand it would be to undermine fatally the myth of that civilization. I think we're getting to a really key truth here. I'm going to repeat that last sentence. Something that was never understood, which has set the terms for global civilization, and was never capable, that we were never capable of understanding, for to understand it would be to undermine fatally the myth of that civilization. Obviously, the myth is that this party can just continue onward and upward. Something upon which that thin crust of lava is balanced, which feeds the machine and all the people who run it, and which they have all trained themselves not to see. And that takes us to chapter 2, the severed hand. Then what is the answer? Not to be deluded by dreams, to know that great civilizations have broken down into violence, that their tyrants come many times before. No, and their tyrants come many times before. When open violence appears, to avoid it with honor or choose the least ugly faction. These evils are essential. To keep one's own integrity, be merciful and uncorrupted, and not wish for evil, and not be duped by dreams. I don't know if this is a poem or what this is. Yeah, this is a poem from Robinson Jeffers, The Answer. Sorry, I thought we were going to get the answer. But anyway, I'm going to skip the rest of the poem. The myth of progress is founded on the myth of nature. The first tells us that we are destined for greatness. The second tells us that greatness is cost-free. That's I'm going to repeat that sentence. The myth of progress is founded on the myth of nature. So we got two myths. The myth of nature is that greatness is cost-free, that basically nature can sustain anything we throw at it. And the first myth, the myth of progress, is that we are destined for greatness, that we're just on this path for greatness. Each is intimately bound up with the other. Both tell us that we are apart from the world, that we began grunting in the primeval swamps as a humble part of something called nature, which we have now triumphantly subdued. The very fact that we have a word for nature is evidence that we do not regard ourselves as part of it. That's a really key point. Indeed, our separation from it is a myth integral to the triumph of our civilization. We are, we tell ourselves, the only species ever to have attacked nature and won. In this, our unique glory is contained. Wow. Outside the citadels of self-congratulation, lone voices have cried out against this infantile version of the human story for centuries. But it is only in the last few decades that its inaccuracy has become laughably apparent. We are the first generations to grow up surrounded by evidence that our attempt to separate ourselves from nature has been a grim failure, proof not of our genius, but of our hubris. The attempt to sever the hand from the body has endangered the progress we hold so dear, and it has endangered much of nature too. The resulting upheaval underlies the crisis we now face. We imagined ourselves isolated from the source of our existence. The fallout from this imaginative error is all around us. A quarter of the world's mammals are threatened with imminent extinction. An acre and a half of rainforest is felled every second. 75% of the world's fish stocks are on the verge of collapse. Humanity consumes 25% more of the world's natural products than the Earth can replace, a figure predicted to rise to 80% by mid-century. Even through the deadening lens of statistics, we can glimpse the violence to which our myths have driven us. And over it all looms runaway climate change which threatens to render all human projects irrelevant, which presents us with detailed evidence of our lack of understanding of the world we inhabit, while at the same time demonstrating that we are still entirely reliant upon it. Climate change, which highlights, which highlights in painful color the head-on crash between civilization and nature, which makes more plain, more effectively than any carefully constructed argument or optimistically defiant protest, how the machine's need for permanent growth will require us to destroy ourselves in its name. Climate change, which brings home at last our ultimate powerlessness. These are the facts, or some of them. Yet facts never tell the whole story. Facts, Conrad wrote in Lord Jim, as if facts could prove anything. The facts of the environmental crisis we hear so much about often conceal as much as they expose. We hear daily about the impacts of our activities on the environment, like nature. This is an expression which distances us from the reality of our situation. The environment, in quotes. Daily we hear, too, of the many solutions to these problems, solutions which usually involve the necessity of urgent political agreement and a judicious application of human technological genius. I talk about these solutions all the time. So he's talking about Jamin here. Things may be changing, runs the narrative, but there is nothing we cannot deal with here, folks. We perhaps need to move faster, more urgently. Certainly, we need to accelerate the pace of research and development. We accept that we must become more sustainable. But everything will be fine. There will still be growth. There will still be progress. These things will continue because they have to continue. So they cannot do anything but continue. There is nothing to see here. Everything will be fine. We do not believe that everything will be fine. We are not even sure, based on current definitions of progress and improvement, that we want it to be. All of humanity's delusions of difference, of its separation from and superiority to the living world which surrounds it, one distinction holds up better than most. We may well be the first species capable of effectively eliminating life on Earth. This is a hypothesis we seem intent on putting to the test. We are already responsible for denuding the world of much of its richness, magnificence, beauty, color, and magic, and we show no sign of slowing down. For a very long time, we imagined that nature was something that happened elsewhere. The damage we do to it might be regrettable, but needed to be weighed against the benefits here and now. And in the worst case scenario, there would always be some kind of plan B. Perhaps we would make for the moon, where we could survive in lunar colonies under giant bubbles as we planned our expansion across the galaxy. But there is no plan B, and the bubble, it turns out, is where we have been living all the while. The bubble is that delusion of isolation under which we have labored for so long. The bubble has cut us off from life on the only planet we have or are ever likely to have. The bubble is civilization. Consider the structures on which that bubble has been built. Its foundations are geological: coal, oil, gas, millions upon millions of years of ancient sunlight dragged from the depths of the planet and burned with abandon. On this base, the structure stands. Move upwards, and you pass through a jumble of supporting horrors. Battery chicken sheds, industrial abattoirs, I don't know what those are. Burning forests, beam-trawled ocean floors, dynamited reefs, hollowed out mountains, wasted soil. Finally, on top of all these unseen layers, you reach the well-tended surface where you and I stand, unaware or uninterested in what goes on beneath us, demanding that the authorities keep us in the manner to which we have been accustomed, occasionally feeling twinges of guilt that lead us to buy organic chickens or locally produced lettuces. Yet for the most part, glutted, but not sated on the fruits of the horrors on which our lifestyles depend. We are the first generations born into a new and unprecedented age, the age of ecocide. And to name it thus is not to presume the outcome, but simply to describe a process which is underway. The ground, the sea, the air, the elemental backdrops to our existence, all these our economics has taken for granted, to be used as a bottomless tip. I think maybe he meant to say pit. Endlessly able to dilute and disperse the tailings of our extraction, production, and consumption. The sheer scale of the sky or the weight of a swollen river makes it hard to imagine that creatures as flimsy as you and I could do that much damage. Philip Larkin gave voice to this attitude and the creeping, worrying end of it in his poem, Going, Going. This is just a few lines. Things are tougher than we are, just as Earth will always respond, however we mess it about. Chuck filth in the sea if you must. The tides will be clean beyond. But what do I feel now? Doubt? That's the end of the poem excerpt. Nearly 40 years on from Larkin's words, doubt is what all of us seem to feel all of the time. Too much filth has been chucked in the sea and into the soil and into the atmosphere to make any other feeling sensible. I just want to comment here. I took my first upper division course in environmental engineering back at UC Berkeley in fall of 1990. Professor William Nazaroff, who was quite a rising star at the time and is now a somewhat senior professor at UC Berkeley, and he commented that in decades past there had been this notion that, and actually a quote, the solution to pollution is dilution. Just dump it in the ocean, dilute it. Fart it into the air and it'll dilute up there in the atmosphere. Same with rivers and lakes and all that. Dilution. But he said, and this was in 1990, that is really breaking down and it's not so true anymore. I thought that was, anyway, just fitting to insert that here. The doubt and the facts have paved the way for a worldwide movement of environmental politics, which aimed, at least in its early raw form, to challenge the myths of development and progress head on. But time has not been kind to the Greens. Today's environmentalists are more likely to be found at corporate conferences hymning the virtues of sustainability and ethical consumption than doing anything as naive as questioning the intrinsic values of civilization. Capitalism has absorbed the Greens as it absorbs so many challenges to its ascendancy. A radical challenge to the human machine has been transformed into yet another opportunity for shopping. Denial is a hot word heavy with connotations. When it is used to brand the remaining rump of climate change skeptics, they object noisily to the association with those who would rewrite the history of the Holocaust. Yet the focus on this dwindling group may serve as a distraction from a far larger form of denial in its psychoanalytic sense. Freud wrote of the inability of people to hear things which did not fit with the way they saw themselves and the world. We put ourselves through all kinds of inner contortions rather than look plainly at those things which challenge our fundamental understanding of the world. Today, humanity is up to its neck in denial about what it has built, what it has become, and what it is in for. This is really profound because he's making a distinction between, the Fox News type of denial and the denial of a Jamin Shively who, is still very much a part of this world and this paradigm. I'm going to take just I don't know, should we take maybe a 4-minute break? I just, I've been sitting here for 3.5 hours. Let me take a 4-minute break, get some water, etc. And you may need a break as well. We'll resume at 40 minutes past the hour, whatever time zone you're in, unless you're in India or one of those time zones that works on the half-hour basis. But 40 minutes after the hour, in 4 minutes, I'll be back. Okay. All right. It's 40 minutes after. I'll just continue reading. Today, humanity is up to its neck in denial about what it has built, what it has become, and what it is in for. Ecological and economic collapse unfold before us, if we acknowledge them at all, and we act as if this were a temporary problem, a technical glitch. Centuries of hubris block our ears like wax plugs, we cannot hear the message which reality is screaming at us. For all our doubts and discontents, we are still wired to an idea of history in which the future will be an upgraded version of the present. That's a really interesting point. I'm kind of wired to that idea. I'm dreaming of this utopia in which we solve our problems. The assumption remains that things must continue in their current direction. The sense of crisis only smudges the meaning of that must. No longer a natural inevitability, it becomes an urgent necessity. We must find a way to go on having supermarkets and superhighways. We cannot contemplate the alternative. Well, there I part with this substantially, radically, actually. I do envision a future which is radically different, and we've talked about that a fair amount here on the Social Club. And so we find ourselves, all of us together, poised, trembling on the edge of a change so massive that we have no way of gauging it. None of us knows where to look, but all of us know not to look down. Secretly, we all think we are doomed. Even the politicians think this, even the environmentalists. Some of us deal with it by going shopping. Some of us deal with it by hoping it is true. Some give up in despair. Some work frantically to try to fend off the coming storm. That would describe me pretty well. Our question is, what would happen if we looked down? Would it be as bad as we imagine? What might we see? Could it even be good for us? We believe it is time to look down. The next chapter, chapter 3, is called Uncivilization. And it starts with a quote from John Berger from A Story for Aesop, from Keeping a Rendezvous. And here's the quote: "Without mystery, without curiosity, and without the form imposed by a partial answer, there can be no stories. Only confessions, communiques, memories, and fragments of autobiographical fantasy, which for the moment pass as novels." I'm not sure I got that, but anyway. If we are indeed teetering on the edge of, by the way, this is all from the Dark Mountain Project, dark-mountain.net, /about/manifesto. But just start with dark-mountain.net. If we are indeed teetering on the edge of a massive change in how we live, in how human society itself is constructed, and in how we relate to the rest of the world, then we were led to this point by the stories we have told ourselves, above all by the story of civilization. The story has many variants, religious and secular, scientific, economic, and mystic. But all tell of humanity's original transcendence of its animal beginnings, our growing mastery over a nature to which we no longer belong, and the glorious future of plenty and prosperity which will follow when this mastery is complete. It is the story of human centrality, of a species destined to be the lord of all it surveys, unconfined by the limits that apply to other lesser creatures. What makes this story so dangerous is that, for the most part, we have forgotten that it is a story. It has been told so many times by those who see themselves as rationalists, even scientists, heirs to the Enlightenment's legacy, a legacy which includes the denial of the role of stories in making the world. Humans have always lived by stories, and those with skill in telling them have been treated with respect and often a certain wariness. Beyond the limits of reason, reality remains mysterious, as incapable of being approached directly as a hunter's quarry. With stories, with art, with symbols and layers of meaning, we stock those elusive aspects of reality that go undreamed of in our philosophy. The storyteller weaves the mysterious into the fabric of life, lacing it with the comic, the tragic, the obscene, making safe paths through dangerous territory. Yet, as the myth of civilization deepened its grip on our thinking, borrowing the guise of science and reason, we began to deny the role of stories, to dismiss their power as something primitive, childish, outgrown. The old tales by which generations had made sense of life's subtleties and strangenesses were bowdlerized and packed off to the nursery. Religion, that bag of myths and mysteries, birthplace of the theater, was straightened out into a framework of universal laws and moral account keeping. The dream visions of the Middle Ages became the nonsense stories of Victorian childhood. In the age of the novel, stories were no longer the way to approach the deep truths of the world, so much as a way to pass time on a train journey. It is hard today to imagine that the word of a poet was once feared by a king. Yet for all this, our world is still shaped by stories. Through television, film, novels, and video games, we may be more thoroughly bombarded with narrative material than any people that ever lived. What is peculiar, however, is the carelessness with which these stories are channeled at us as entertainment, a distraction from daily life, something to hold our attention to the other side of the ad break. There is little sense that these things make up the equipment by which we navigate reality. On the other hand, there are the serious stories told by economists, politicians, geneticists, and corporate leaders. These are not presented as stories at all, but as direct accounts of how the world is. Choose between competing versions, then fight with those who choose differently. The ensuing conflicts play out on early morning radio, in afternoon debates, and late night television pundit wars. And yet, for all the noise, what is striking is how much the opposing sides agree on. All their stories are only variants of the larger story of human centrality, of our ever-expanding control over nature, our right to perpetual economic growth, our ability to transcend all limits. So we find ourselves, our ways of telling unbalanced, trapped inside a runaway narrative, headed for the worst kind of encounter with reality. In such a moment, writers, artists, poets, and storytellers of all kinds have a critical role to play. Creativity remains the most uncontrollable of human forces. By the way, I'm going to stop reading here and just kind of browse. I'm maybe halfway through the chapter on civilization. And I'm just going to start skimming ahead to see kind of, to paraphrase the Wendy's ad from the 1980s, where's the beef? Like, where's this headed towards? And that's not to discount this beautiful document that I'm reading here, but just I'm kind of running out of gas, and you may be as well, and I just kind of want to get to the heart of it. The myth of civilization. Ecocide demands a response. Too important to be left to politicians, economists, etc. What new form of writing has emerged to challenge civilization itself? collective denial, this response we call uncivilized art, and we are interested in one branch of it in particular, uncivilized writing. Writing which attempts to stand outside the human bubble and see us as we are, highly evolved apes with an array of talents and abilities which we are unleashing without sufficient thought, control, compassion, or intelligence. Amen and high five, authors. Totally agree with you there. Apes who have constructed a sophisticated myth of their own importance with which to sustain their civilizing project. Uncivilized writing offers not a non-human perspective. We remain human, and even now are not quite ashamed, but a perspective which sees us as one strand of a web rather than as the first palanquin in a glorious procession. It offers an unblinking look at the forces among which we find ourselves. And this echoes the writings of Daniel Quinn, which I highly recommend. I'd maybe start with The Story of B as a good place to start. Talking about the work of Robinson Jeffers, who during one period was celebrated by the media. His crime, but then later was ignored, his crime was to deliberately puncture humanity's sense of self-importance. His punishment was to be sent into a lonely literary exile from which 40 years after his death, he has still not been allowed to return. His vision of a world in which humanity was doomed to destroy its surroundings and eventually itself. Not a rejection of humanity, an affirmation, but an affirmation of the wonder of what it means to be truly human. It is to accept the world for what it is and to make our home here, rather than dreaming of relocating to the stars or existing in a man-forged bubble and pretending to ourselves that there is nothing outside it to which we have any connection at all. Talking about various writers who are basically consistent with uncivilization. Chapter 4, To the Foothills. They talk about a base camp for our project, like climbing Everest. You start at the base camp. So I guess Dark Mountain is kind of their metaphor for where we're headed. We shall make the pilgrimage to the poet's dark mountain, to the great immovable inhuman heights which were here before us and will be hereafter. And from their slopes we shall look back upon the pinprick lights of the distant cities and gain perspective on who we are and what we have become. This is the Dark Mountain Project. It starts here. Where will it end? Nobody knows. Where will it lead? We are not sure. It will work up the project of uncivilization and invite all comers to join the discussion. Then it will become a physical object because virtual reality is ultimately no reality at all. It will become a journal of paper, card, paint, and print of ideas, thoughts, observations, mumblings, new stories which will help to define the project, the school, the movement of uncivilized writing. Climbing the Dark Mountain cannot be a solitary exercise. We need bearers, Sherpas, guides, fellow adventurers. We need to rope ourselves together for safety. At present, our form is loose and nebulous. This is a complaint I've long been making, that we need to come together to figure this out. The 8 principles of uncivilization. Number 1, we live in a time of social, economic, and ecological unraveling. All around us are signs that our whole way of living is already passing into history. We will face this reality honestly and learn how to live with it. Number 2, we reject the faith which holds that the converging crises of our times can be reduced to a set of problems in need of technological or political solutions. I've long been living under that premise. We believe that the roots of these crises lie in the stories we have been telling ourselves. We intend to challenge the stories which underpin our civilization, the myth of progress, the myth of human centrality, the myth of our separation from nature. These myths are more dangerous for the fact that we have forgotten they are myths. Number 4, we will reassert the role of storytelling as more than mere entertainment. It is through stories that we weave reality. 5, humans are not the point and purpose of the planet. Our art will begin with the attempt to step outside the human bubble. By careful attention, we will re-engage with the non-human world. Number 6, we will celebrate writing and art which is grounded in a sense of place and of time. Our literature has been dominated for too long by those who inhabit the cosmopolitan citadels. Number 7, we will not lose ourselves in the elaboration of theories or ideologies. Our words will be elemental. We write with dirt under our fingernails. Number 8, the end of the world as we know it is not the end of the world, full stop. Together, we will find the hope beyond hope, the paths which lead to the unknown world ahead of us. And that's kind of the end of this page. There's a spring 2019 Dark Mountain book, a collection of nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and artwork that responds to the Age of Fire, which I guess we are in right now. All right. Okay. All right, I'm going to click on events just to see what's shaking in the Dark Mountain world. We got stuff going on in Oxford, England. Looks like it's all in England. Okay, Glasgow, Scotland, Frankfurt, Germany, England, Sweden, England. And then some past stuff. Anyway, good stuff. Dark Mountain Project. Thank you, Dark Mountain. All right, everybody. 4 hours into the social club, mostly alone for most of the last hour, except for you watching, and thank you so much for watching. I'm going to sign off until next time. Thank you all for participating in and watching this radcast of the Social Club at the End of the World. Thank you.